Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are having an open Q&A. This is what we're doing all the way through season 2 of House of the Dragon on a normal Thursday. On the Sunday, in case you're wondering, we have a pre-show live stream and that goes at the same time as this, but just goes for a couple of hours, looking back at the episode that we've just had, looking forward to the episode which is going to be coming. But this is an open Q&A. Obviously, there will be a lot of questions about episode, what are we up to now? 5 of House of the Dragon. But feel free to ask other questions as well about the wider world of Ice and Fire, Lord of the Rings, other things that I cover on this channel. So we will be dotting around a little bit, but I will try and start with questions about House of the Dragon, then move on to A Song of Ice and Fire, then we'll do Lord of the Rings and other things towards the end. So I will give you my usual spoiler warning in terms of House of the Dragon as the show is on. Show spoilers are not okay. If you got leaks, spoilers, plot spoilers, things like that you know's in the show, that's not okay. Book spoilers are. The books have been out for a while. The show has been. I've got a couple of questions on this, so we'll talk about this actually a little bit later. But the show has been roughly sticking to the books, but with some changes. So it's okay to say what happens in the books because that may or may not happen on the show. Okay, so as I say, we'll be dotting around a little bit as we go, but let's start with a question from Magmafrost13 saying, "Hi Robert, hiya. How do you feel about Visenya being labelled as the definitive first rider of Vhagar and wielder of Dark Sister, at least in show canon? It's been bothering me for a while that we never hear about any of the Targaryens between the Exile generation and the Conquest generation being dragon riders. And while a lot of that can be chalked up to a lack of info in general, we're now being told that Vhagar definitely was not claimed in the 23-ish years she was around before Visenya was born. Dark Sister is perhaps even stranger. How could the sword have been unused for so long?" Okay, so this is a reference to the last episode we had, where, if you remember, Rhaenyra's alone in a room. She's reading a book, I think, or a scroll, and Jace walks in, and he sort of peers over her shoulder and says, "Visenya, why are you reading about Visenya?" And she says, just stuff we know, but Visenya, the first rider of Vhagar and the first wielder of Dark Sister. And then they go on and talk about other things. Now, this is obviously show canon. For those who are sort of new to this, George R. R. Martin has been very clear in his mind now. There are two canons. There's book canon, which is his stuff. He's in complete control of that. And there's show canon, and he can influence what happens on the shows, but he's not in absolute control of that. And show canon is trying to stay all together, so all the shows are in the same kind of canon universe. But here we have this. Whether this is also true in the books, we do not know. What do I think about Visenya being the first rider of Vhagar? Well, I think this I'm okay with. I've got absolutely no problem with this. The situation at a very high level is House Targaryen, with we do not know how many members, left Dragonstone with 5 dragons, one of which was a very young Balerion. Of those 5 dragons, when they got to Dragonstone, they were on Dragonstone for about 100 years. While they're there, 4 of those dragons died off, and 2 new dragons were born. That's Vhagar and Meraxes. Now, there may have been other dragons born and dying during that time, we don't know. But that's the broad situation. We also don't have a full family tree. There's 5 generations there, and we don't have a full family tree for it. What we do know, though, is that by the time of the invasion, there's only 3. Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys. There's no cousins that we know of, uncles, aunts, whatever, hanging around. It's just the 3. So the clear implication is that the Targaryen family tree has been quite thin, if that's the right word, if you're looking at family tree. It hasn't expanded out during that time. So whereas we may well have had enough dragons for there to be like one Targaryen per dragon to start with. What happens after that? We don't know how long those other 4 dragons who died out survived. It may well be that if you go back a generation, you actually have a couple of them that are still alive. Maybe they died just before the conquest. We simply don't have the information. So to say that Visenya was the first rider of Vhagar, okay, that's fine. That seems to stack up. I've got no problem with that at all. Dark Sister, I think, is an intriguing one. So Dark Sister is a Valyrian steel sword. Now, um, the show has introduced a lot more Valyrian steel in House Targaryen than we had previously known about, which I like. I found it bizarre, this idea that House Targaryen could have left Old Valyria, thinking Old Valyria was going to just disappear, be blown up, and only take 2 Valyrian steel swords with them. But we've now got Valyrian steel armor, we've got a Valyrian steel necklace, we've obviously got the Valyrian steel dagger, so we've got quite a lot more Valyrian steel going on. But I think we can probably assume we do just have those 2 swords, Blackfire and Dark Sister. Now, for Visenya to have been the first person to have wielded Dark Sister implies that there's never been more than one a fighty type Targaryen alive at any given moment in time during that 100 years. Is that feasible? Maybe. As I said, it's a very thin family tree. It also implies we don't know how old Valyrian steel can last for a very long time. We don't know how old Dark Sister is. That's assuming that they just bought Dark Sister or obtained Dark Sister or forged Dark Sister just before they left. There were no people who used it before then. And we also, another unknown we have here is how the Valyrians used their Valyrian steel swords. Were they largely symbolic? As far as we can tell, for the majority of the dragon riding families in Valyria, they stayed in Valyria and were involved in politics. So there wasn't huge amounts of fighting. So having a Valyrian steel sword probably, as much as anything else, was quite a symbolic thing. So it's a harder stretch to think that 100 years would have passed by without somebody being sort of the owner of Dark Sister, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility. So, yeah, I'm kind of with you. I mean, on Vhagar, I've got no problem at all. On Dark Sister, I get the uncertainty, but if that's the case, then I guess that's the case. Michael Trainer in the chat saying, where do you see this season ending? In a previous live stream, you mentioned the fall of King's Landing. Do you still think that? My money is on the Battle of the Gullet. Yeah, so I've, I've held on to this idea that season 2 should finish at the fall of King's Landing ever since I heard that the show had been commissioned. You could go back through my old live streams. I've said many times, I've always tried to say it in terms of if I were running the show, this is how I would do it. You have 4 seasons. Season 1, you have all the build-up, which is roughly what happened. Season 2, you have the first bit of the war, which takes you up to the fall of King's Landing. Season 3, the second bit of the war, which takes you up to the second fall of King's Landing. And then season 4 is when everything's just chaos, and it ends with the Hour of the Wolf. I personally would love it to go on into the Regency, but at the moment, I still don't think that's going to be happening. But that's how I've always said I would do this if I were in charge. Now, they've not that they're taking cues from me. I should emphasize, but that's what happened certainly on season 1. Season 1 was the build-up to the dance, and it, as we know, that ended just. I mean, I think I probably originally said with Viserys' death, they did sort of take it an episode or 2 beyond that. Might they still end here with the fall of King's Landing? They are on track for it, is what I'm going to say. The Battle of the Gullet is fine, and I can understand why people would say that that would be a good place to finish. That what you've got to work through is what are the things they have to do in order put on screen in order for um, these things to happen, because we've now only got 3 episodes left. It's quite sad, but with 3 episodes to go, they've just released. Incidentally, they've just released the runtimes for those episodes. I think they're all over an hour. 2 of them are 70 minutes plus. So these are quite long episodes, but still we only have 3 episodes left. And as it stands, we just got to the point, as far as Dragon Seeds are concerned, where Team Black are going, well, maybe we could like have a look at a few sort of offshoots from the family tree. There's no mention of um, uh, Targaryen bastards. There's no call going out yet. The characters that in the book were flying um, dragons are not anywhere near Dragonstone. We still haven't seen, although we might just now be able to chart out a possible route how they might get to Dragonstone. They certainly seem to be at least an episode, maybe even 2 episodes away from it. So when will the Dragon Seeds actually be riding dragons? Maybe episode 7. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I've no more inside information than you, and that would mean you'd have to go immediately onto the Battle of the Gullet, which is the first combat that the Dragon Seeds have. And Nettles is involved in that. My take on Nettles, we will talk about Nettles in a moment. My take on Nettles is that if you're going down the Nettles route, that has to happen sometime after the other Dragon Seeds. So for all of those reasons, and the fact that we've had nothing in any of the trailers that looks like a massive sea battle, my take is probably not the Battle of the Gullet. But they obviously need some big set piece, something that looks good, and also something that brings the overarching arc of the season to a satisfying conclusion. Now, we've got individual arcs that we've got going on here. Clearly, I mean, I think probably the most obvious one is we've got Daemon on his solo side quest, but everybody's got their own character arcs, and that the whole thing has to come to some kind of satisfactory conclusion at the end of this season. If you do not do the Battle of the Gullet in the book, the Battle of the Gullet happens before the fall of King's Landing. If they pushed that back, I think that we could definitely see the fall of King's Landing as the big end point of this. Or if you want to take this down the way, and they used to do this on Game of Thrones. If you remember classic Game of Thrones, the first few seasons, they would have the penultimate episode of each season was the big episode, the episode where the exciting event happened. Ned Stark at Baelor, the Battle of the Blackwater, all of those things, they were the penultimate episode. And then the final episode was what followed, and sowing the seeds for the next season. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in episode 6. It wouldn't surprise me if maybe at the end of episode 7 even we get the fall of Dragonstone. So I'm not saying it's definitely happening, but I'm saying that at the moment I've seen nothing which actually changes my view that that's the speed they're going at. I think I had another question in the chat. Auntie Slayer saying, hello, just sending some love and appreciation to Robert and the mods until I can figure out how to sub at a higher tier on Patreon. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate that. And I will take that as an early shout out to the moderators. Moderators, you do an amazing job. If you are here in the chat, then please just show them a little bit of love. They do brilliant work, just making sure that all of the trolls are kept away, everyone gets a chance to contribute, and we get a supportive and I think really excellent chat going on. So yes, please do show a little bit of love to the moderators. Andrew Kay saying it's not impossible that Visenya is Vhagar's first rider, but unlikely in the text. Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether I say it's unlikely. we don't know exactly. We don't know the family tree, and we don't know exactly when Vega was born in the text. I think that's me caught up on the chat. Let's go quickly to Magmafrost 13 again, saying, "We now have been told that Rhoynar has made an attempt or attempts to claim a dragon on Dragonstone, but was rejected. Do you think we can see this as her already having a dragon bond with the as yet unhatched Morning? I also think it's worth discussing that we also heard about Melies apparently rejecting Daemon in this most recent episode, and I believe these are the only times we've ever heard about a dragon rejecting someone who later bonds with a different dragon. I've often heard people claim that a dragon chooses their rider, but is this the first actual evidence we have for that idea?" Yeah, this is fascinating. So I did, and I'll probably release it on Monday. I did do a video with Aziz from History of Westeros about the dragon seeds, which obviously touches a lot on this kind of dragon bonding idea. And we were playing around this idea. We were scratching our heads whether or not a Targaryen who is trying to bond with a dragon is ever an adult dragon, not the kind of the malformed ones that appear later, that a Targaryen gets rejected by that dragon, and we couldn't, off the top of our heads, think of one. So yes, this is new. I'll talk about Rhoynar in just one moment. This idea that Daemon was rejected by Melies adds to this kind of idea that this is the dragon choosing the rider rather than just an automatic, "Hey, I'm a Targaryen, I'll come and bond with you." There's an awful lot of mentions in Fire and Blood of such and such a person had not bonded with a dragon, but we're not told exactly what that means. So we get Aemond, for example, that's said of. Does this mean that he sort of went to some dragons and it didn't really work? Or does this mean that he just hadn't really felt the desire to go and try and bond with the dragon? It's not made clear. So this is show canon. Adding to it, George R. R. Martin, and I will talk about this, I suspect, quite a lot this live stream, because there's a lot in there. George R. R. Martin has done a blog post just, I don't know, 3-4 days ago about dragons. Now, if you're hunting for it, I tweeted about it a while ago, so feel free to sort of go and check out my X. But it's quite a long post. It's the biggest lore drop we've had about anything really from George R. R. Martin in a very long time. And he covers a lot of ground. He covers his really quite passionate defense of dragons having just 2 legs, not 4, and the direct Targaryen sigil, but also dragons, whether they sort of roam around or just sort of stick to one place in their lair. He says the latter, and also bonding. He doesn't talk about bonding, but he does say that more will be revealed about how dragon bonding works in The Winds of Winter, Dream of Spring, and also Blood and Fire, which is Fire and Blood Part 2. His working title. So it's an odd blog post for him to put out in that much detail, and has led a number of people to wonder whether he's uncertain about some of the dragon lore that's been coming out from House of the Dragon. And the who bonds thing could well be to do with dragon seed stuff that we just haven't seen yet, or it could well be to do with these kinds of things we've just got the drops of information going in about Daemon and Melies, for example. As for Rhoynar making an attempt to claim a dragon but was rejected, do we think that this is her already having a dragon bond with the as yet unhatched Morning? I mean, we could, if we're thinking show canon, book canon. We could certainly go down that route. For those who don't know, so Rhoynar is a lot younger in the book, it has to be said. And she has a dragon egg, but no dragon. And her sister, Baela, has got a dragon, and she's a bit jealous of this. She does go off over to the Vale. She goes off with 3 dragon eggs. She prays over them all of the time. One of them hatches into a new dragon called Morning, who then, this is sort of towards the end of the Dance of the Dragons, who then, a little bit afterwards, she then becomes a dragon rider. And this is massive at the end of Fire and Blood, because all of the dragons, basically, apart from this small handful not under control of the Targaryens, are dead. So this is the only live dragon that we, under the Targaryens' control, that we know. So Morning in the book story is really quite significant. Should we take that to apply to the show? I think the jury's still out, because if you wanted to not include Morning, then you could not include Morning. On the assumption they're not doing the Regency. Ewan Ogilvie, thank you very much for the super sticker. Maura Lee, very generous, Maura. Thank you very much. Saying just a show of love and support. Thank you for all you do. Thank you very much. Callie Summers, did Vhagar maybe bond with Aemond because he's like Visenya, a more martial or ruthless or pragmatic sibling who's mistrusted and less popular with the people? Yeah, quite possibly. So, Vhagar was also, so Lena obviously had Vhagar, and she's always described as being very independent spirited. Although she's not around during wartime, one would think that if she were, then she would very much get involved in that war. So she does feel quite similar to Visenya. Aemond, again, feels quite similar. So yeah, it sort of makes sense. It's hard because we simply do not know. I mean, this idea that the dragon chooses the rider isn't borne out by all of the information that we have so far from the books, but it kind of instinctively feels right. It kind of feels both ways as much as anything else. The bond has to be felt from both sides, is my working take on this one. Let's go to question from Lady Vaughan Strauss. Do you think, now that Aemond has it, the dagger of prophecy will end up with him at the bottom of the God's Eye, as well as being recovered along with Dark Sister and then passed to Bloodraven and his prophecy buddies? And you also asked about Robert Chambers' influence on Martin. I have to admit, I'm not a Robert Chambers expert, but you were asking about the homage in The King in Yellow with the Yellow Emperors and Carcosa. If there's anyone in the chat who's an expert who can happily put something in there, I will very happily read that one out. So it's sometimes there's authors you just haven't read, and that's absolutely fine. But you're asking about the dagger of prophecy, the what we might call the cat's paw dagger a bit later on, because remember, this is show canon, which covers both. It is the same dagger all the way through, which adds just by the by, adds a layer to the ire using that to kill the Night King, because this is the dagger of prophecy with the prince that was promised. So that's appropriate that that's the dagger that's used. What will happen is that Aemond clearly has decided to claim it and have it with him. I think that there's therefore a reasonable chance that, yes, he will have it with him when he goes to Harrenhal, and he will therefore probably have it with him when he's riding and fighting Daemon. So I think that the answer to the first bit is that logically it makes sense that when the battle over the God's Eye Lake happens, yes, he will have it. Now, his body is recovered after that. They managed to pull it out from the lake, which kind of implies that it wasn't in the middle of the lake, or otherwise that would be quite hard. Um, but they managed to recover the body, but because they find Dark Sister in his eye, so that's how he died. Now, therefore, they will recover Dark Sister, and they will recover the dagger. Now, will the dagger end up with Bloodraven and his prophecy buddies? Well, quite possibly, yes. It would. Uh, it would make a lot of sense to me. That is still 2 or 3 generations away, so it could well go through a few different holders between now and then. One would think probably Aegon the Third won't really care about it. It's possible that Aegon the Second could, because Aegon the Second, let's not forget, he outlives Aemond for a bit. So it's possible that it's his people that drag Aemond out of the lake, and he says, "Right, I want my dagger back." So it's entirely possible that he gets it. All we know, because we don't know any of this background history, all we know is that at some point it kind of ends up as part of the the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, sort of crown jewels, basically. It sort of came up with them up to Winterfell. That's how it came into the story. So, yeah, I like the idea that Bloodraven has it. I like the idea that this is whoever holds that in some way carries this prophecy on with them. Weirwood Net saying, when in doubt, drop a donation. Well, that's very, very kind. When in doubt, Bloodraven. Carl Karsnark saying, check out Grey Waste Tim's channel for a lot of Yellow Emperor lore vids. Lots of Lovecraft stuff too. Well, there you go. That's I knew there would be somebody in the chat, and often is Carl Karsnark with the more esoteric knowledge. I don't know. That's meant as a compliment. I hope you take it as that one. Weirwood Net, thank you very much. And Michael Trainer, who is your favorite Targaryen? Who is your favorite dragon? Please give lots of reasons for your choices. I've got a lot of questions to get through, but my favorite Targaryen is Bloodraven, because he's fascinating and because he's not just Targaryen, because he's Targaryen and Old Gods Green Seer, and that is at the heartbeat of this story. And added to which, everything from his time right up to A Song of Ice and Fire, you can. I mean, I always say, when in doubt, blame Bloodraven, but so much of what happens you can kind of link potentially across to him with varying levels of tinfoil. So that's why him. Favorite dragon? And I don't know if I've got a favorite dragon. This is probably not helpful. I think Dreamfire is growing on me because of Helena and the fact that the name is Dreamfire, and there feels like there's some lore or knowledge in there that we just haven't been told yet. Okay. Let's go. Callie Sam was saying he's not a Targaryen. He is in my heart, Callie. Commander Ray, George's take on dragons as being the typical Drake body with 4 total limbs that we see in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, and it being something that is natural, I find to be rather contradictory to how he otherwise handles magic in his world, such as with the seasons being out of whack. Why do you think he has such a strong take against classical fantasy dragons such as Smaug? Okay, so I said we would probably be coming back to this George R. R. Martin blog post a few times. There's a lot of information about dragons from him in that. And one of the things which he I mean, I don't want to use the word rant, but it's a passionate argument for dragons should have two legs and the wings, and so the forward limbs are basically uh, the wings. Um, his argument is that it's it if you look around vertebrates in nature, you'll find that there are no kind of six-limbed beasts with wings. That just isn't there, so it doesn't feel normal and natural. He thinks that there's um, a confusion has come in often through heraldry, where you would often have dragons with two legs, but then over time that got more and more often the dragon would have four legs and then wings come out sprouting out of its back. For a modern day example of that, you just look at the Welsh flag. For those who know what the Welsh flag looks like, it's a big red dragon with four legs and wings coming out from its sides. So he says that that doesn't feel realistic, um, and that's his justification, is that he wants his world to feel realistic, not high fantasy. Now, I suspect that we've got different understandings, me and George R. R. Martin, about what high fantasy is, but I kind of understand where he's coming from, in as much as he, in my view, wrote certainly book one of A Song of Ice and Fire as a high fantasy masquerading as a low fantasy. Because, yes, you get two or three chapters where you've got dragons appearing, you've got ice zombies, you've got a chapter where Bran's there having all of his dreams and visions. But broadly speaking, magic doesn't exist. People get on with their life without magic. The characters that we're sort of being told to respect as being knowledgeable and wise, Maester Luwin, Tyrion, they scoff at the idea of magic. So I kind of get that. And he's very clear he wants dragons to be beasts, is the word he uses. Yes, they're magical creatures, but they are creatures. They're not just some completely made up thing from a different universe. They have their own, in Witcher terms, ecological niche. So that's where he's coming from. Whether we sort of agree with that logic or not, I think the important point is that we should take away as readers of A Song of Ice and Fire is that George R. R. Martin does not want us to see dragons as being something otherworldly. They are creatures that exist in that world and make sense in that world. That's the kind of the message that he wants us to be getting from this. Um, Whether you think that ties up with his understanding of how many legs a dragon should have, I think is kind of a secondary issue to that one. A question from the chat. Nat Westwood saying Damon is the Cristiano Ronaldo of Team Black and needs all of Portugal to play just for him and still lead them to crash out. Talent and turmoil. Well, I will kind of leave that football analogy there. I let the chat decide on that one. I understand what you're meaning. The Damon wants to lead, even if he's not showing the leadership skills that he should do. One of the things which his kind of, I mean, we kind of call it like a side quest or like a acid trip, whatever it is that's going on with Damon in Harrenhal. One of the things which is clearly being shown to us is that he is having these ideas of grandiosity. Whether he's actually stepped over to the point of treason, we're not 100% sure, but clearly he thinks that he is the better person to be leading. He's the person who's willing to make the tough decisions. He's the person who's there with the natural leadership ability. He's better designed for this kind of stuff. But I think we're supposed to be looking at what's going on and thinking, is there actually any evidence of that? Um, he's gone there to gather together an army, and he's failed miserably. Basically, he's making the hard decisions. Go out, go forth, House Blackwood, commit atrocities, and he thought this would bring them all to heel, and then they follow him, and eventually they'd learn to respect him and then love him, whatever. Uh, but that just didn't work because he misjudged people. Um, and similarly, he's there. Let's rebuild Harrenhal, and you just think, is that really like the priority here? It's like chopping bits of wood and trying to rebuild the largest castle in Westeros. The whole point about Harrenhal having been built, this was it's almost a temple to pride, hubris. Um, and here he is literally trying to rebuild this. So that's, I think, a thing we're supposed to be seeing from Daemon, is this idea that maybe he's not, and probably he's going to understand that at some point. Um, Andrew Kay saying, rebuild Harrenhal, long been determined not the wisest use of time or funds. Ben Melmoth saying, Daemon is a rock star born in the wrong era. Yeah, that's the kind of feel that George R. R. Martin definitely wants him to have. Cindy saying Daemon is showing just how right his brother was not to name him his heir. So yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the points we um, have to take. That another one is clearly, because I think a lot of people are trying to unpick what's going on with Daemon. Is he just being taken out of the plot so that he's not there at Dragonstone and people can be talking about his absence? No, he is there for a reason, and there's the character development reason for him here. This is, as I say, this is different, very different from what happened in the book. In the book, he's there, he does get the army, and he's a bit quiet for a while, and then he goes and does stuff with that army. So this is very different from what happened in the book, but the visions and things are taking him through characters from his past, and it's almost like this is his conscience, that he's having to work through his conscience. And the clear implication is that we're being shown, and at some point probably he's going to realize that he's not the natural leader and perfect king candidate that he thinks he is, and also maybe all of these things that people have accused him of in the past, his loved ones have accused him of, maybe they were right. So I don't know where they're going to go with this, but this at the moment feels like, dare I say it, a bit of a redemption arc. I don't think he's going to go all the way there, but I think that he will come to some self-realization about, and that will lead on to what he does next. Let's go to question from Maura Lee. Alice Rivers seems to be playing an important role at Harrenhal in causing Daemon to have all these dreams. Why do you think she's doing this? What is a real intention? Is she trying to psych him out? What was her relationship with him in Fire and Blood? Who is Alice Rivers really backing, or does she even care who ends up on the Iron Throne? Somebody else, oh yeah, Rassler saying, I've seen it suggested that Alice may be deliberately messing with Daemon for Team Green. But I think she's actually trying to help Daemon by getting him to make the right decisions and to lead well. Yeah, so what's going on? Well, first of all, what's the relationship between him and Alice in the book? And I've got the whole quote. It's one sentence. Whatever her powers, it would seem Daemon Targaryen was immune to them, for little is heard of this supposed sorceress whilst the prince held Harrenhal. So that's it. We don't get huge amounts in the book about Daemon and Alice. I did quite like Jane Magician, who's friend of the channel, sometimes drops into the chat as well. I did quite like he tweeted out that line and then followed it up by saying, "We not much is." Uh, Little is heard of her from when Damon was there. And said, yeah, because Damon's pretty embarrassed by what he was dreaming all of that time. It does kind of make sense. But what does she want? Well, I think the Team Green thing doesn't. I haven't seen any evidence for that on the show. Certainly don't see any evidence for it in the book. If she were working for Team Green, yes, maybe the kind of slowing Damon down, holding him there, things like that. But the visions that he has seem to be there, and what she says to him seem to be trying to make him a better person. She's there basically. She tells him off for the atrocities. She hears things on the wind. She says, that's you shouldn't be doing that. The visions he gets, the extent to which this is the Weirwood Network, Alice, how different can we tell them apart? They seem to be accusing him of stuff. You did bad things. You always. There's young Rhaenyra stitching up Jaehaerys's neck wound, and she's saying, "You always abandon me. Go away and let me pick up the pieces of your mess." Basically, this is his tortured conscience. So I think it would be hard to say on the evidence that we've got that she is anything other than giving him a bit of tough love. And so that means I don't think we can say she's working for Team Green. I think, given everything we've seen and heard, we have to assume that she's Team Weirwood Network. She's a Greenseer in some way. So what is she actively trying to do? Well, the Weirwood Network are very aware. We don't know what their exact plans are at this point in time, obviously. But the children of the forest will be very aware of the others, and they will be very aware of the principle as promised. This was something which came, and the Azor Ahai Reborn prophecy and things like that. So is this the starting point? I kind of speculated. There's a vision. There's a video in here somewhere, probably after the season finishes, which is just going to try and unpick this whole thread that we've got about Harrenhal and Alice Rivers and Damon, and what are they getting from this, and the possibility that him dying over, and Aemond as well, dying over the God's Eye Lake right next to the Isle of Faces, maybe that's allowed them to see and understand a lot more about him and Targaryens. Is there some kind of link? I think there is. I haven't quite teased it out in my mind. But what at the moment is that they are trying to make him a better person. And I think that's probably as far as we can go. Marvin Martin, has there ever been a Targaryen Traster of sorts? George R. R. Martin should think about 6 books instead of 6 books instead of 6 legs. I mean, I don't mind him talking about 6 legs. I mean, this is everyone's allowed a little nerdy thing that they just get very worked up about. The other thing, incidentally, if you haven't read that article, connected with the number of legs that he was talking about, was the Targaryen sigil, which, whenever he's kind of described it, is very clear. It's the dragon, 2 legs, 3 heads, which is obviously symbolic, but a dragon in the way that he understands dragons. And that was how the Targaryen sigil was in the first 4.5 seasons of Game of Thrones. But then when Dany comes across with her fleet, and this is the first season after he'd kind of taken a big step back from Game of Thrones, the sigil, massive on the sails, was a dragon with 4 legs. And so someone at some point had just changed the sigil to a thing which George R. R. Martin hates. And now he then goes on and says, so in House of the Dragon, they've gone with that second sigil. They could have gone with the first one. He understands the desire to keep consistency between the two shows, but he wished they'd been consistent with the first half of Game of Thrones, not the second half of Game of Thrones. So anyway, that's an entire digression. This is not a new issue for him, and as I say, I think we can allow him a few little nerdy hobby horses, but. Um, uh, has there ever been a Targaryen Craster of sorts? I mean, I don't know what when you say a Craster of sorts, um, if you mean sort of marrying uh, lots of women and then marrying their daughters. Not that we know of. I mean, the closest, obviously, is Maegor, who had 6 wives. Uh, Polygamy is absolutely fine for the Targaryens in their own culture and customs. But no, we've uh, not had any sort of Craster types that we know. Um, let's go to Maura Lee. With King Aegon indisposed due to his injuries and his brother taking power, with the poor folk in King's Landing starving and angry because they have little food and resources, how do you think this will affect the Greens being able to keep power on the Iron Throne and Queen Rhaenyra taking power back and taking her throne back versus the show? Well, so the lack of food isn't something that's hugely mentioned in the show. In the book. It is a bit later when Rhaenyra's ruling and they've got no money and everybody's being taxed huge amounts. There's that starts to come in there, but this makes a lot of sense for me in terms of if there is a naval blockade that kind of and there's a war going on in the Riverlands preventing supplies coming through. Yes, you would expect food shortages. So this makes a lot of sense, I think. What might they? What might this mean in the show? Well, the people, and this is what we've been building towards this all season, and this has to be an important part of this season's arc. It's going to carry on and be even more important next season. But the people suffering and the people starting to get angry, and the people realizing that dragons aren't gods; they're just meat. These are really important because it means that the potential for there to be some uprising against the Targaryens has grown hugely. And indeed, we've seen pictures from the trailers where there clearly is some kind of riot going on. Now, I think a lot of us had assumed that the riot might be attached to Melees being brought through the city, but that doesn't seem to be the case. That just sort of put everyone into this kind of hushed silence. But probably food, as they played up the food thing a lot. And so Mysaria saying there's more than one way to win a war or fight a war. I think they're going to be using this and they're going to be stirring up the people against Team Green and blaming them for the food shortages. That seems to be the way that they're going with this. But the broader issue is the small folk are increasingly getting a list of Targaryens that they hate. So there's been Rhaenyra the Monstrous, we hear. Then we've got Aegon. He's the guy who murdered all those innocent rat catchers. Daemon, he's a what do they? I can't remember what they called him, but like a war criminal, a tyrant. That's what Daemon is, a tyrant. Say the River Lords. So increasingly, the people of the Seven Kingdoms and the small folk in particular are starting to get this list of Targaryens they don't like, and that in the longer term is going to start to turn into actually none of these Targaryens are any good. I don't like any of them. Question from John Buxton. a member for 6 months. Yeah, if you're a channel member, you get free super chats, basically. So thank you very much, and congratulations on 6 months. Hi, Robert. I'll be seeing George R. R. Martin and Philip Pullman converse in Oxford in 2 weeks. Any good questions, suggestions are dearly Duncan Egg related, please. Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm jealous. I mean, I was in Oxford myself just I don't know, a month or so ago. Lovely place. And George R. R. Martin and Philip Pullman, both clearly excellent writers. That's part of his tour. He's doing a little tour, incidentally. George R. R. Martin. He's doing. I think he's coming to London briefly to see some people. He's going to go to Oxford for that. He's going to go to Northern Ireland to see the Duncan Egg set. He's going to go up to Glasgow for Worldcon. So he's doing a little mini tour of the UK. Any good questions? A dearly Duncan Egg replay. Well, I'm good. This is something I'm going to throw to the chat. If you had George R. R. Martin and Philip Pullman in front of you, what questions might you throw to them, maybe to do with Duncan Egg? And Erin's son X saying dragons eat a lot of food, and Rhaenyra will bring more dragons with her when she gets to King's Landing. Yeah, it's a good point, and they did already touch on that when, if you remember that first scene when Aegon was sort of welcoming people in and being Aegon the magnanimous, and somebody said the dragons are eating all of my sheep, I think it was, and he said, well, you can have, you know, you can have more back, and Otto basically overruled him. Let's go to a question from Rassler saying, good day, Robert. I hope you and Dan the dog are well. We are, thank you very much. Willam Blackwood decided to fly the Targaryen banner whilst committing war crimes, despite Daemon saying the crown can't be seen doing certain things. My question is, will Daemon now be forced to execute Willam for his crimes to bring the Riverlords back on side? This could explain why the show created this character. Yes. I think probably that's you've nailed it basically here. So for those who don't know, in the book you have House Blackwood has the Lord at the start is a guy called Sam Blackwood, but he dies quite quickly. And then his young son Benjicott, Bloody Ben as he becomes known, takes over. Now Willam, who's the character that we're seeing mostly in season 2, Willam Blackwood is a made up for the show character. So a lot of people have been wondering, I've had this question actually a couple of times on these live streams, why did they do that? And I think, yes, you're probably right why this is. In the book, this goes slightly differently, incidentally. In the book, the Blackwoods do commit atrocities. We're told that they drive away sheep, they desecrate septs when they can find them, they burn down farms. This is on Brackenland. And then the Brackens come out to kind of defend themselves. And then there's a big battle, which is the Battle of the Burning Mill. So they start out by doing that. And Sam Blackwood, who's the Lord at the time, dies in that. So they are, because they've moved these things around, because in the book what happened is that the Blackwoods join up nice and quick. When Harrenhal falls, the Blackwoods join up very quickly, and as do quite a lot of the other River Lords. So we don't get all of this longer plot line with Daemon. In order to kind of make that work, and I suspect also in order to, because they liked, this is the way these things go, they liked this idea of you have the Blackwood Bracken battle right at the sort of the beginning of an episode, and then we see everyone, which turns this into a land war, not just a let's send assassins at each other kind of war. They've definitely gone with the we've got an escalation of conflict idea here. So for all of those reasons, I suspect that's why they shifted it around, and they thought, well, okay, we need another character. If we're going to keep Ben, Bloody Ben, here, then we need another character who can be doing all of this stuff and will die. And this perhaps kind of works around to this idea. We do see in one of the trailers Daemon doing what looks like an execution. So probably that's him. Aeneas, what weapons would you pick for the battlefield? I mean, it would depend on the battlefield, really. It would. But in this context, a Valyrian steel is clearly the best. Question. Dr. Debunk. Oh, we've got a couple of questions, potential Dunk and Egg things here. Dr. Debunk saying, when did Egg start growing his hair out? When was it when his father became king? Wheezy Squeezebox, will we see Dunk make the 8 in the series? Yeah, so a couple of questions there for you. Martin S. saying, Oxford and Cambridge are nicer looking towns than Luton. I have seen all three. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to deny that. Absolutely. I've spent one day in Luton. And I would agree, Oxford and Cambridge are much more beautiful. Let's go to Amara Lee asking when the Battle of the God's Eye is going to be. Yes, I don't think it's going to be this season. There's still quite a bit of plot going on. It would not surprise me if that comes towards the end of season 3. Gina Z. Hi, Robert. Following on some discussion from your episode 5 pre-show live stream about Rhoynar potentially bonding with the dragon in the Vale and taking Nettle's role, do you think the odds of this happening have increased after episode 5? George Martin's law drop emphasizing that dragons aren't nomadic is possibly a reaction to something that is going to happen in the show, and the scene between Rhoynar and Lady Jane felt like it was setting Rhoynar up to do something heroic because she feels frustrated and helpless. Also, in Daemon's vision of Laena at Harrenhal, she asks him, have you looked after our girls? Perhaps Daemon and Rhoynar will have some father-daughter bonding time rather than there being a Daemon-Nettles relationship. Yes, I mean, if you'd asked me a week ago, and many people did, whether I thought it was possible this rumor was going around. No spoilers here. I do not know this at all, but there was rumors going around that because Ryan Condal had not been talking about Nettles and we hadn't had a character called Nettles be kind of introduced as part of the cast, that maybe Nettles had been cut. If you'd asked me a week ago, I'd have said, "Well, there's still time for Nettles. We don't have to worry about it yet." I think that the odds of Nettles not appearing have, I would agree, for the very reasons that you've just given, they have increased significantly in the last week. George R. Martin's blog post did have the feel of getting his disagreement with something in the show out of the way early before something airs, because although he clearly wanted to get it off of his chest, I think that he also realizes that if something appears, he may even legally not be able to, but if something appears on the screen and then he immediately follows up with something which says this isn't right in the law, then it would look pretty bad. So, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that we're definitely there, but I think that we have to accept the fact that there's a reasonable possibility now. Aeneas, which color dragon would you want most? Well, I think the golden or red dragon. It has to be a red dragon, doesn't it? Andrew Kay agreeing some of the blog post could have been preemptive criticisms. And also Condal seemed oddly defensive when Nettles was brought up. Hopefully just a misdirect of some sort. Yeah, I mean, the bits that people are picking on in this article he goes to great lengths to say that dragons aren't, as Scott of Greywater Watch says, dragons aren't nomadic. And the way he justifies this, so he says basically in universe, he says, just imagine if they were. because in his world, dragons they don't fly. They will fly somewhere if they're ridden somewhere. They will go off wherever that person wants. Broadly, they'll fly them off to different places, but left to their own devices, they will just nest in their lair, and they will just gather food from around them. They're not going to fly off to another region and then try their luck there. That's just not how they are. They very much settled and focused in around their area. And so he basically then says, so you won't find dragons in sort of um, hunting across these different regions. Imagine if that were the case, then you will find that all of Westeros during this period would have had dragons flying, because we've got lots of dragons without riders right now. Imagine what that would have been like in Old Valyria. There were hundreds of dragons there, and they all stayed in Old Valyria. Imagine if they didn't. Imagine if they did rove wild wherever they wanted to. Then when the Doom of Valyria happened, you'd still have a whole load of dragons. It's important for the plot of the whole story that dragons do not um, fly off into other places. They stay where they are. And then he sort of ends up with this lie, is that if you start messing around with the law, then the story and the world can kind of rips apart like tissue paper, which is very kind of evocative language, and did very much feel as if he's trying to make a point about something in the show. Martin S., what is the best and worst looking town or city in Westeros? I mean, best looking. I mean, possibly if you're looking at castles, then probably the Eyrie. The way it doesn't come across this way really on the show, but in the book, it's written. It's white stone. It's beautiful, kind of these towers right on this mountain near the top. Magnificent. It's supposed to be incredibly beautiful. High Garden is also incredibly beautiful, surrounded by all of these rose fields. Worst, I mean, it depends what you count by worst looking. I mean, the slums of Flea Bottom probably look pretty grotty, to be honest. Weirwood Net saying, when in doubt, drop that mod love. Yeah, a bit more love for the moderators. Absolutely. And while I'm at it, let me just show a little bit of love to my patrons. Patrons, thank you. This is why I prioritize your questions in these live streams, because I cannot do what I do without your support. I hugely appreciate it. Thank you very much. Carl Stark saying Balerion wanders a bit, but not so far that he's out of contact with Dany, and he makes it back to save her pretty quickly as well. Yeah, so that's true, and so there is an element of this that George isn't telling us yet, which is and you were talking about Balerion, you're presumably talking about Drogon, but Balerion flew back to where it was born. We think against the wishes of Arya, who was riding Balerion at the time. Drogon flies out into the middle of the Dothraki Sea with Dany on his back. Both of those things seem to be, there is a rider, but the rider doesn't know how to control the dragon because it's their first time riding a dragon. So both times that seems to be what's going on there. So there is an extra layer of nuance to this, but I think the point still stands. Elizabeth, spoiler. Yeah, so this is a book spoiler, so that's okay. I was just reading ahead just to make sure. But in Fire and Blood, it's mentioned once that Daemon has a contact on the Green Council. Who do you think it is? Yeah, so I've mentioned this a few times, and the issue is that I don't actually hang on. Let me see whether I can find the exact quote. I've done this. Said this a few times. This is a direct quote from Fire and Blood. Daemon Targaryen this is in the build-up to Blood and Cheese, incidentally. And it said, in his let's not let it not be forgotten. In his youth, Daemon Targaryen had been the prince of the city, his face and laugh familiar to every cut purse, whore, and gambler in Fleabottom. The prince still had friends in low places of King's Landing and followers amongst the Goldcloaks. Unbeknownst to King Aegon, the Hand, or the Queen Dowager, he had allies at court as well, even on the Great Green Council. Um, which seems like a throwaway line, and that then moves on to basically say, and also there's Masseria. But you have to ask who is his ally on the Green Council, and you look around the Green Council and you go, okay, so we've already been told it's not Aegon, it's not Otto, it's not Alicent. That's already taken out quite a lot. It's hard to believe that it was Grand Maester Allweil. We've then got Larys, Tywin Lannister, and Ironrod. Now, given things that happen later, it doesn't seem likely that it's Ironrod or Tywin Lannister. So, presumably, this has to be Larys. We don't have anything more than that. It's not mentioned again. It's just dropped in there, and we move on. So, are they going to do this on the show? That he's got an ally there in Larys. I mean, it's hard to imagine that they would, but yeah, it's possible. Charis Ballerina picking up something for Lonely Night. Lonely Light, sorry. Thank you very much. I love it when people pick up questions for other people. Hello, Robert. Do you think we'll see Adam Velaryon at the Isle of Faces in a Green Man meeting? I think we'll definitely see him go to the Isle of Faces. Whether we will see what happens there is another matter. Now, this was curious in the book, and at the moment it's still very curious on the show, because we're never really given a reason for why Adam Velaryon goes to the Isle of Faces. We're not told what happens when he's there. There's like a small, a couple of sentences of speculation. Perhaps he met the Green Men kind of thing. And then he flies back out, ends up going to battle and dies. So whatever he did didn't really seem to come to anything. So what was it? We don't know. It was just dropped in there. Perhaps just as an acknowledgement of the fact that everything we've been told about the Isle of Faces and its kind of protections, dragons don't care about any of that. When I say it's protections, the Isle of Faces in the middle of the God's Eye Lake. It's an island, and if you try to get to it, then you suddenly find that the currents just take your boat away, or suddenly a sudden gust of wind comes and blows you away, or maybe a whole load of birds come and start flying at you. Basically, nature will not yet let you near there, but a dragon can just fly over and drop down and land there. So, why did Adam Velaryon go there? We don't know. Will it happen on the book on the show? Yes, but they've made no link from Adam at the moment to the Weirwood Network or anything like that. So that would be something that they'd have to make up pretty much from scratch. So yeah, I think we'll see it. My best guess at the moment still is that we will see it happen. He will fly down and land there. We'll see him come back with like a slightly intrigued face, and then he'll fly off and die, and we'll never know. I think they'll keep it that enigmatic. Marvin Martin, right after claiming Vhagar, Aemond went from a crybaby over a pig joke trying to kill over a pig joke. Does dragon riding trigger latent Targ madness? Possibly, but in Aemon's situation, he had been picked on all of this time, and then suddenly he had claimed the biggest, nastiest, fiercest, baddest dragon in the world at the time. He will have felt the confidence boost, the dopamine hits, the just the uh, all of the positive things just bursting through his system at that moment will be so high that I think the adrenaline rush. I think that will have his reaction afterwards makes absolute sense to me. He's not going to climb onto the back of this massive magical beast, fly through the air. He was never flown through the air at all. Fly through the air, come back landing down. No, that's now yours. You are now the most feared person in the Seven Kingdoms, and that not give you a little bit of a confidence boost. So whether that's the case for all Targaryens or just for him, we don't know. Let's go to question from Lady Pushkins. Hi, Robert. Alice Rivers appears to be Harrenhal's Christmas Carol, being Daemon's ghosts of past, present, and future. Do you think her story will differ from the book, as in not actually being a person in the show? I noticed in the show she also has a fire burning, similar to Melisandre. Do you think she worships R'hllor? I don't think she worships R'hllor. I think she's representative from the old gods in some way. Um, will the story differ from the books? Well, it's different in as much as she's got a lot bigger role. Um, but the interesting thing will be what happens with Aemond, because basically in the book, what happens is she becomes his lover, and she's the only one he spares when he goes and kills every member of the household. And if they go down this route on the show, watch out for this, because poor old Sir Simon, who I've got quite a soft spot for, I have to say. So Aemond wipes out all of the Strongs, apart from Larys, obviously, who's back in King's Landing. The only member of the household he doesn't kill is Alice, who he takes as a lover. And then after the war's ended, she says, I'm pregnant with Aemon's child, and he's the rightful heir to the Seven Kingdoms. So that's what happens, and that's a massive story which is left hanging, really, for Fire and Blood Part 2. My instinct is that they probably won't want massive storylines hanging at the end of the show. So whether they go down that route or just leave it a little bit ambiguous, I don't know. But certainly they will play up the magic-y side again. I can't imagine that Daemon, having been there and having all of this magical mystic quest, if Aemon arrives, something similar is going to happen. Lonely Light asks, saying, well, when they eventually do the Conquest show, do you think they'll start with Aenar and Daenys, or just Aegon and his sisters? Is that show big enough? Well, they obviously haven't started writing it yet, and we're still hearing every now and then, oh, they might start by doing a film of the actual conquest, and then have the kind of the aftermath, the Sons of the Dragon, as the TV show, which would be quite cool. I think that they're not going to start with as the Daenys the Dreamer as like here's a main character, and then at some point we'll just sort of like they can have a season, and then we'll go on to deal with the conquest. I don't think they will do that. What they may well do is have a flashback scene, or they might have a kind of a bit like the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, where you have this. Here we are 3,000 years earlier. This is what happened, and that's what's happened with Sauron, and then there was the ring. I could imagine them doing an intro bit, which is like the Targaryens once were this dragon riding family in old Valyria, but then one of them got this dream. I could well imagine that as the kind of an intro, and then you kind of cut to the present day, and you get Aegon getting a dream as well. That kind of works for me, but I don't think that they're going to have a whole several episodes or proper bit of a season about Valyria, sadly. Land of Always Winter. Concerned about reactions of show-only viewers to the terrible, tragic events we know are coming. It's worse than Game of Thrones. Might it be too much for some? It might be. It might be. Because it's only going to get more tragic. I think a lot of this will depend on how they handle it. And what I mean by that is that you can have lots of kind of tragic stuff that actually viewers will cheer on. So, for example, I've also played around with the idea that perhaps this season it works well as an arc for Criston Cole if he dies at the end of this season. He should die roughly at the end of the season, maybe the beginning of next season at the speed they're going at. He's not long for this earth in the book anyway, and so if he dies, I imagine a lot of show only people will actually be even though his story is actually quite tragic in and of itself. And there could well be, if just to take one random example of a theory that we've already talked about here, if we get Daemon and not Nettles but Rhoynar, and then they're having this father-son bonding time, and he's actually learning to be the father that he never was, then and actually I've just made a completely random connection. There was back in season 1, there was a scene which was edited out. After Laena died, there was a scene where you had Daemon and his 2 daughters, and we just saw him kind of walking away from them. But there was a deleted scene where he like gives them this big hug, and it's very clear that he does care about them and he understands the pain that they're all going through. But they took that out. It's possible that they made the writing decision at some point around then. Actually, we want Daemon to go on an arc from being not a good dad to a good dad. And so we will take that scene out of season 1. We've already filmed it, but we'll take that out in the edit. So I don't know. That's just a little conspiracy theory. But let's imagine that they do go down this route. And then when Daemon dies, it could be tragedy, but it also could be he's now at peace. He's done terrible things with his life, and now he's just seen Aemond is doing all these horrible things, and he thinks, okay, the last thing I can now do. I've lost so much. I've tried my best to make things better. What I can now do is stop Aemond from destroying the livelihoods of all these people in the Riverlands, because that's what Aemond was doing. He was on the back of Vhagar, just flying over the Riverlands and just burning things down everywhere he went. And so that would then be tragic, but also the end of a good and strong story arc for him. So from a show only person's perspective, the tragedy would not just be horrific, it would be, dare I say, bittersweet. So yes, I can well imagine it being quite dark for a lot of people, but it really does depend on how they frame all of this. And Charis Ballerina, why hold the small folk captive in King's Landing? What advantage does having a bunch of starving, angry peasants surrounding you give? It's a very good question. So the order to shut the gates, it sort of confused me a little bit as well, I have to admit. But I think we're supposed to see Aegon. Aegon's a mirror of Daemon in many ways, the way that they're presenting him on the show. George R. Martin also did this a bit in the book. He's wanted to rule all this time, and now he's getting the chance to do these things. I think we're supposed to look at him and go, these decisions aren't necessarily the best. Are you sure you're the best? You thought you were the best at doing this, but maybe you're not as good at it as you think you are. And I think we're supposed to see this as just a misstep on his part. And Carolina Clay saying, now that we know that Daenerys rode Balerion, they have to show her. Yes, I mean, again, I think it's entirely possible that we will get like a flashback or a kind of a this is what happened before all of this kind of intro to the Aegon series. I just don't think we're going to get a High Valyria TV show at this point. Andrew Kay saying, I hope we get a pre-conquest season at Dragonstone for character development and show what the dynamics are. Yeah, I mean, I would like that too. The thing we have to be very aware of, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but very aware of, is that the further away from what we've got written by George R. R. Martin, the more that's going to have to be created, invented. So the invasion, we've got lots of information on. He's written about that. But there are still going to be massive gaps when you actually try and adapt it to TV and go, oh, hang on a moment, there's this whole bit here that we don't know about. There will definitely be stuff. But the build-up to the war from Aegon's perspective, basically Fire and Blood is like, I'm not entirely sure what's going on. We hear that he went to the Sept and prayed all night, which seems very pious of Aegon. Then we've got the dream. If I were doing it, I would have a few episodes of build up, and then you can have you can do the first bit of the conquest in maybe even going up to something like Harrenhal in season 1. But if they are going to do a film, then I think they'll just go straight in with the conquest, because they'll have to cut out a whole amount of excess material and just keep it as streamlined as possible. I think that's me caught up in the chat. Let's go to a question from Martin S. saying, hello, Robert. I would like to discuss with you the Green Council's rejection of Alicent Hightower as a regent. As detestable and evil as Larys Strong is, he had a point, even if it was a harsh one to Alicent. The notion that a woman, and not just a specific one, but as a general rule, isn't fit to rule in Westeros, as regressive as that is not just something that someone on the Green Council mentioned once in passing. It's the core principle on which the entire cause of Team Green was built. It was a case of Alicent having espoused a horrible principle when it suited her, because it helped her and her team argue in favour of her son at the expense of Rhaenyra's claim, and then for that same horrible principle to come back to bite her. Contrasting that is that I think Alicent would be slightly more fit to rule than either of her sons, but then again, so would Rhaenyra. Yeah, so the fact that Alicent would probably make a better ruler than Aegon or Aemond is a low bar, but I think she does pass it, and I would agree again, the same for Rhaenyra. So her being rejected as regent, yes, that from Team Green's perspective, that makes sense. And you would have thought that she should have figured that out. Now, one thing which we kind of skated over here, we've talked about Maelor the Missing, the fact that we don't have the third child of Aegon and Helena is there. They have a daughter, Jaehaera, and clearly no one even mentions her in terms of the succession. So it's that Aemon's next in line. So clearly they are building this on the male preference primogeniture idea. Warren Blythe saying, "Greetings and salutations, Robert. Random Westeros history question. The Rhoynar were famous for water magic, right? They had water witches in the way that Valyria had blood mages, and after they lost the Spice Wars, Princess Nymeria settled them in Dorne. Was Dorne already a desert when they got there? Are they working to change it with water magic? Isn't it weird to go from being a river people to a desert people?" Um, okay, so a lot of questions there about the Dornish and when the Rhoynar arrived. So the first point here is yes, it was a desert land when they arrived there. What we're basically told is that there were trees and things, but the first men came in and chopped lots of stuff down. But it was always quite hot, and one suspects quite deserty. But they arrived over there, and yes, it's not a big, lush river-based community. But Nymeria decided this is where we're stopping. She burned all the boats. Now, so that's the first thing. The second thing, water magic, yes, but their water magic is very specific. Their religion is about Mother Rhoyne, the river. They believed in the river. They lived on the river. The river gave them life. The river was their lifestyle, and this was their this was where their gods were effectively. The giant turtles were sort of representatives of the gods, and Mother Rhoyne was what they worshipped. So this wasn't just water magic generally, this was the river. And from what we read in the World of Ice and Fire, yes, they had some river magicians. Now, when they arrived in Dawn, some of them, some of the Rhoynar felt exactly the same as you have sort of hinted at here, and thought, well, I don't want to be living in a desert. We're river people, and so they found the Greenblood River, which is a reasonable sized river that runs through Dawn, and they set up an approximation of the culture that they'd had before on this new river. They created these barges, perhaps out of what was left, initially at least, out of what was left from the boats that they came in after they got burned. They created these kind of narrow draft barges that they made them more beautiful, colourful. They would go up and down the river, and then they'd have markets and gatherings, and they'd tie all of the boats together. And they were known as the orphans of the Greenblood. Now, um, the the reason why they're orphans was because they believed that they'd been cut off from their mother Rhoyne, because their river is all the way over there. So it's not just water magic, it's not just river magic, it's river Rhoyne magic. Now, some of them then many years later did kind of like drift back and go back to the Rhoyne. So you do find a few people, in fact, you find a couple in A Dance with Dragons, the people who are on the boat that takes Tyrion and co down the River Rhoyne. These are from that same culture. So some of the Rhoynar did mix with the Dornish who were there already. Some of them didn't, and just tried to recreate their own culture in a new place. But none of them felt that their religion was relevant to them where they were, because this is that they were orphaned. They were cut off from their home because the River Rhoyne was so far away. Let's go to a question from Carolina Clay saying, Hi, Robert and Dan. In Game of Thrones canon, Melisandre is said to be, this is show canon, Melisandre is said to be 400 years old. If the shows share a universe, then does that mean that she's alive during the dance? Do you think there's a chance we might see her? Probably with a different face, with a different glamour, but we could recognize her from her necklace, and she might be looking for Azor Ahai even then, and the prophecy is still important in this show. Yeah, it's a good question. A few people sort of did wonder that when the show got announced, and Charis, Coleen Van Outen, I've forgotten her name, the actress who played Melisandre, was asked about this and did say, "Yeah, I'll be up for coming back," but she hasn't returned. So, is she still alive in show canon? Probably yes. And but where is she? Probably somewhere in Essos. So this is 170 years before A Song of Ice and Fire, before Game of Thrones. So she could well be alive, but probably she's a red priest. She's been learning her magics. She's probably somewhere in Essos. As far as we're aware, she just became this kind of rogue priestess when she saw things in her flames that made her go to Dragonstone, believing that's where she's going to find Azor Ahai reborn. We've not heard that she's done this before, that she's been heading over to Westeros before looking for these things. But yeah, maybe. And if they wanted to do a little bit of fan service for show people rather than book people, then yeah, maybe they would give us a little hint of something. But there's not much here really. The Red Priests, we don't hear much of them in Fire and Blood. There are some in port cities. There are a few temples dotted about, but the the Red Priests in Westeros that we know, Melisandre only arrived of her own volition, and then Thoros was sent over there because the powers that be in the church looked at Eris II and thought, there's a guy who likes fire. Maybe he'll come and worship our god. A reflective rambling, picking up a question for Constantine Tranos. Thank you very much, does George R. R. Martin's saying that the dragons feeling natural debunk Bath's suggestion that Valyrians created them? Is this a thing that Maester's got wrong? Right, so let's go to what he actually says, because he does mention this. He says dragons bond with men, some men, and the why and how of that and how it came to be will eventually be revealed in more detail in The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, and some in Blood and Fire. Brackets, Septon Bath got much of it right. So that's the thing that we're going on, that he's told us. So we have to say Septon Bath got much of this right. So but the kind of the feeling natural, what Septon Bath, we've only got snippets of what Septon Bath said, which is a little bit frustrating. But basically, yes, the kind of hints here are that they took wyverns, wyverns, and dragons and did a whole kind of like gene splicing with blood magic, and bonded the dragons to themselves that way. So exactly how, we don't have that bit of information, but that's the kind of the implication of what this is. Does that undercut the fact that they should feel natural? I don't think so. What we're not talking about here is, if you're a Witcher fan, we're not talking about the kind of making monsters kind of thing that we have wizards up to over there. This is taking an existing natural creature and then bonding it to a human. That seems to be what they're doing. So it should still feel like a creature, but it's a magical one, and it's one that has been given a magical bond. Let's go to a question from another one from Carolina Clays. What's up with Myssaria's network in King's Landing? She had Alicent's former handmaiden. We learned she now has Deanna, the current tavern worker who Aegon assaulted in season 1. And Rhaenyra's handmaiden seems to know Deanna, which means she knew Mysaria before the war. What's up with that? I think it just goes to show, firstly, who's in the network. This is normal people. So Alinda Massey, who's the lady in waiting, I think is technically what we're calling her, rather than the handmaiden to Rhaenyra. So the Masseys are actually they're a good and noble house. But she doesn't seem to be part of Myssaria's network. She's just somebody that Rhaenyra trusts to do something. The people who we have seen as part of her network are just normal servants, and this is what we're trying. This is the impression we're getting from Mysaria, is that is who she's got as these kind of contacts, is just normal people who you wouldn't expect, and so she is there presenting herself as being on their side. What's interesting is that this isn't just a network. From what we've seen, it's just people actually know of Mysaria and they trust her. They know that she's on their side. This isn't just paid contacts. When we get Linda Massey trying to make her way into King's Landing, when she's there and she talks to the guard, it's not like, here's a big bribe, can you get me in? This is if she was name dropping, and can you get me in because Mysaria wants me to get in? That's what it is. So that's the kind of network it is, which seems opposite to Larys Strong's network, where he's got these guys who he's released from prison. He's cut out their tongues. He's paying people. This is where he's coming from, which is supposed to feel very different from this much more organic kind of network that Myssaria's got. The Snake All Sean, how many total stories are there likely to be in the Dunk and Egg series before the tragedy at Summerhall, including the current 3? Well, I mean, how long is a piece of string? George R. Martin has, at various stages, said he was thinking 12. But it has to be said that the speed at which he's moving through time seems to suggest that there's probably going to be more than that, in theory, anyway. What I say, the speed at which we're moving through time. So we've had 3 stories, and those 3 stories are all very much in the early part of Egg's life. He's not only not king, but this is a point at which he's sufficiently far down the line of succession that it's seen as okay for him just to be sort of wandering around the countryside with a hedge knight. Now, so we've got 3. We know there's another one which is going to happen time-wise quite soon. The She-Wolves of Winterfell, that seems to be roughly they're heading up north at the end of the last story, so that's going to happen again quite soon. The Village Hero seems to also be happening at some point in the space of the next, when they come back down south again, presumably in the space of the next year or 2. And he's talked about, we should probably do a story from when they're in Dorne, which was like going back in time. So if you take that, that's 6 already that he's got in his head. When Dunk's not only not king, but from well before that, before he was even next in, or close to being in line to the throne. And we've got various things. We would have to have, obviously, we'd have to have the what happened at Summerhall, but you'd also have to have what happened with all of the him being made king, what happened with the story with what happened with all of the betrothals of his children. So that's another 3 we've got going on. And then that's just completely skirting across the highlights from when he's there. There's also another bit where lady, the person we know as Lady Rohan Weber, she later marries into the Lannisters and then mysteriously disappears sometime later, which surely is part of a Dunk and Egg story. So he's kind of said 12. I think that he could do a lot more if he wanted to, but Winds of Winter first. And just while we're talking about books, the throwaway reference to Blood and Fire, being Fire and Blood Part 2, in that blog post that he did recently, does make me think that he's probably done more work on that than he's letting on. Because if he's in a position to tell us that certain bits of information are going to be released in that, that means that he's done a little bit of thinking about it at the very least. And if, for those who were around in the fandom at the time, when you remember when Fire and Blood came out, it was, it wasn't a surprise, but it was like we thought you were working on the Winds of Winter. It turns out you've got this 700-page book that you've just been doing on the side, as it were. It would not surprise me if once he's done Winds of Winter, and yes, that is what he's working on next, he quickly does a few Dunk and Eggs. Then we suddenly get Blood and Fire appears. And then he turns his attention to A Dream of Spring. Now, how many years into the future that is, I do not know, but I think that is in his mind. That's what he's going to be doing. Snakeall Sean, oh, welcome. You've become a channel member. Thank you so much. Hugely appreciate that. And Snakeall Sean is gifting 5 memberships. That's really kind. Thank you. This is the thing. I'm not as big into I don't understand all the memberships, but if you become a member, you can gift memberships to people, and that means that you get and I can't remember all of the different reward levels, but your names get highlighted in the chat, so I will see them more and be more likely to spot your comments. And so O'Reilly, Michelle Ramo, Matthew Stewart, Mondo Cool, and Nat Just Nat, welcome. So there you go. Let's go to Carolina Clay saying Ryan Condal said that Maelor is not currently alive in this timeline, which gives us the possibility that he might be alive in the future. Helena could be pregnant right now, or she could get pregnant by someone else. Aegon would be very unlikely to be able to rise to the task from Afnar, as Mushroom tells us. Perhaps she and Aemond might try to conceive together so they can have a male heir. I don't think Aemond actually has a crush on her. I interpreted what he said about marrying her as I would do whatever was asked of me by the crown. So what's going on there? So Ryan Condal, when he was, this is another little snark that George R. R. Martin you had about the show when he talked about Maelor the Missing. You kind of get the impression that he's still liking the show. I think he genuinely is enjoying the show, but I think they've made a few decisions this time around with the law that he's not particularly happy with. But Ryan Condal did say, when I'm talking about Maelor, that he does not currently exist in this timeline. Now, when could he exist in this timeline? Well, there's not much of this timeline left in book lore. As we discovered, they can change these things. But I speculated that what that meant, and whenever this was, when Ryan Condal said it, it was probably after episode 1, actually, because everyone was talking about blood and cheese. I speculated that maybe we would find out that she was pregnant, that Helena was pregnant, and that's what was going to happen. And so you could conceivably say that several months have passed this season, and then we get a newborn baby Maelor. That kind of worked for me. The thing is, though, that now we've had 4 episodes since then, and I've certainly not seen anything. Let me know in the chat if you have. But I've certainly not seen anything that makes me go, oh yeah, she's definitely pregnant, or even kind of like a hint that she is. So that idea seems to be going by the wayside a little bit, which is a shame, because Maelor is involved in what happens in the book. Again, they could take that out if they wanted to. So this could well be something they've just got rid of that bit of storyline. And so what was hard hitting in the book becomes less hard hitting on the TV show, which I guess balances with the fact that there are some things on the TV show which have hit a lot harder, I think, than they did in the book. So Rhaenys and the Battle of Rook's Rest, that the emotional impact of that was much more than we got in the book, which was it was like a couple of pages of text. That was pretty much what it was. Then um uh oh yeah, so the Cargill twins as well. Again, just a couple of paragraphs probably in the book, but they made that have a huge emotional impact on the show. So this kind of swings and roundabouts on this one, but I've still not given up hope that Maelor may make an appearance. But as each episode goes by, it seems less likely each time. The Lawrence Gill Variety Channel. Do you wish that House of the Dragon had a different opening theme to Game of Thrones? I do. Yeah. I mean, I love the theme. We all love the theme, but it would have been nice for a slightly different one that keeps the same kind of feel. But yeah. Martin S. Was the 1 hour delay in starting the Sunday live stream due to the Spain versus England soccer finals football match? Yes, it was. But let's move on from that one. I will, like Aegon the Magnanimous, I shall magnanimously say that Spain were the better team. So congratulations to Spain. Reflective rambling. This is the Lawrence Gill. Pick up a question. Thank you. Why do you think Aenys the First thought the faith would allow his children to marry after they strongly opposed Maegor taking a second wife? Um, Aenys is not shown to be. Uh, I mean, he's quite. I don't know whether they use the word bookish, but that's the kind of feel. Um, he's a conflict avoider, and but he sort of does things um, that he seems to be some kind of living in his own little bubble. It's quite a weird one actually because it's not like we don't get the impression with him it's the same as being Viserys, Book Viserys. Book Viserys is just he's just happily bumbling his way through his life and just doesn't want any of this noise and arguments just coming in on him. Aenys doesn't quite give that impression, but he just doesn't appear particularly strong. And I think the idea of the implications of what he was doing probably didn't really cross his mind. There might be more. I have to admit I've not read that section for a little while, so I'm just straining my brain to see whether there's another element to it. But yeah, I mean, maybe he just felt that's what Targaryens had to do because that's what his father had told him. Let's not forget that in show canon, and this probably we can take across to book canon, given what we've said. Aegon had the dream, and part of that dream seems to have been, and Targaryens have to be strong. They have to be ruling the Seven Kingdoms. And Aenys took over from his father, and his father will have told him, and we need to have dragon riders, and we need to be separate and pure and different. And so Aenys probably just thought, you know what, this is what we have to do. Brimpy Spingle, if the blacks and the greens settle their differences with a friendly football match, who would win and why? I have actually seen a question. The actors, Matt Smith and the guy, I always forget actors' names, the guy who plays Kristen Cole, Fabian Frankel, they were asked who would be in a five-a-side team for team black and red. I think the only people that they agreed, they both then went off to try and pick normal footballers, which was slightly missing the point. But Matt Smith was straight in with Damon. I think probably I would agree. He would make a good footballer, and then also the Cargill twins. So my instinct is Team Black. Let's go to. Well, Lonely Light thinks that the Greens would destroy. Well, maybe. Corvus Corex saying, "Good evening, Robert and Dan. Good evening to you too. Given Damon's announcement that he will march on King's Landing, and we know that is Rhaenyra's goal as well, do you think the show is setting up an awkward reunion at King's Landing between the two?" I mean, that certainly seems to be where they're pushing this, where the kind of the natural take them, but you have to take into account the other part of Damon's arc, which is this: we're not going down the kind of route of this being a I've forgotten what the phrase was now, but he's learning to be a better person, I think, is basically what we're talking about there in some way. If he comes to that kind of realization, and Alfred Broom has been sent over to go and talk to him, and if they meet up at that point, and then he goes, I really should talk to Rhaenyra, maybe he will do the talking before he marches down. But I think he will get the army, and I think that he will head down, and I think he will meet her there, which is actually what happens in the books. But he might talk to her first. Redemption arc was the phrase I was looking for. Casey Pelletier, what do you think would have happened had Viserys married Laena Velaryon? Would Otto have tried to marry Gwaine to Rhaenyra? Well, it's an interesting question. So, if Viserys had married Laena Velaryon, would Otto have tried to marry Gwaine to Rhaenyra? He might well have done. I think the kind of pithy answer I always have to these, which I sometimes wonder whether it's kind of like ducking the question, but I think it is the right answer. Is the Targaryens had a succession crisis pretty much every generation. This is just what it was like when the Targaryens were ruling. If you look at it, you go, so Aegon took over the Seven Kingdoms. After that, well, his two sons, his second son, basically took the throne in a violent coup. He lost it himself when he died violently, and then Jaehaerys took over, which again was sort of a coup because he wasn't technically next in line. Arya was next in line. Then you have a succession crisis at the end of Jaehaerys's reign. Then you have a succession crisis at the end of Viserys's reign. We have succession crises pretty much every generation with the Targaryens. They are just lucky that sometimes they go by without fighting. Sometimes it's quite a close run thing. When in the Great Council of 101, when Jaehaerys is there and everyone's gathered to try and choose who's going to be inheriting, is it going to be Viserys or is it going to be Laenor when he's on the TV show? What we're told in the book is that Daemon and Corlys had basically both gathered armies to fight this. If the result had gone the wrong way for them, and only didn't because the Maesters said, or they leaked out, this was overwhelming. It was 95%. At which point, then Corlys kind of like backed down. But there could have been a civil war then as well. There were the civil wars and succession crises or crises. That's just how the Targaryens did it. Let's go to a question from Gina Z, a tinfoil question. Could everything Daemon is experiencing at Harrenhal from the time he arrives, or perhaps from the time he drinks the potion offered by Alice, be a dream or illusion? I've been looking for visual clues to separate reality from dream in the Harrenhal scenes, but so far I haven't seen anything conclusive. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's possible. I hope not. I hope not. I think what they are deliberately trying to do is make it seem very clear that Damon he's never 100% not in some kind of dream world and never can never be 100% sure he's not about to see some kind of vision. And I think they've done that quite well. One thing uh, I actually didn't spot this as Aziz from History of Westeros pointed this out to me, and I think it's right every time, but certainly almost every time, maybe every time that Damon wakes up, it's Sir Simon Strong there, either physically waking him up or sat next to him. You know, is a raven has come, or how do you like your goose, or whatever it is. Every time it seems to be, he seems to be there. So you do have in the back of your mind, is he connected in with this somehow? It you would think that if he's living there, he's in charge of the place. He will know that that's a weirwood bed. He will know about the history of the place. How connected is he to all of this? That I think is quite an intriguing question. But is all of it a dream? I think we're supposed to think that all of it is um, has the potential to have a dream element to it. He could be walking around anywhere, and then suddenly, like, oh, there's another character from my past, just coming to accuse me of something. George R. R. Tolkien says, salutations, Robert. Salutations to you too, sir. I had a question about Alice Rivers. She mentions High Heart in this last episode. Is there any way she could possibly be the ghost of High Heart, possibly wearing a glamour? So the ghost of High Heart is a fascinating character who is she's known first of all as the Woods Witch, who is friends with Jenny of Oldstones, who comes down to King's Landing when Jenny falls in love with Duncan Targaryen. This is Egg's firstborn son, and huge crisis is that they have to call off the engagement. That he's got an engagement to a Baratheon, and they have to call this off so that he can marry who he wants. He has to come out of the line of succession, and all alongside this, we get this Woods Witch, who we're told then gives the prophecy about the prince that was promised to that line will come through from Jaehaerys II's line and then his children. So that's who she is. She goes down to Summer Hall with Jenny Volstone's implication and sees witnesses what happens, wallows in all of the pain and misery, and then heads up to High Heart, where she does lots of visions. And High Heart being this place where a grove of weirwood trees chopped down, and Arya meets her there. And she gives Arya and she gives the Brotherhood Without Banners this whole series of what actually are quite, well, very true visions. And although they don't really know what they mean, we know what they mean. So she's described as very short, 3 foot tall, white skin, red eyes, very kind of weirwood color coding, very blood raven color coding. And the implication is that maybe she's like part child of the forest or something along those lines. Might this be Alice Rivers? Well, I like the idea in theory. I just she doesn't look like the Woods Witch, but who knows? Maybe in another 100 years or so, she will be a lot shorter and a lot paler of skin. So I'm not discounting it. I actually quite like it, but I don't think we've got any evidence for it. Let's go to a question from Who was that? Was that Reflective Rambling in the chat saying the question is, and this is this mythical five-a-side football match between teams green and black. Question is how long it would take Aemond to get a red card. Not very long, I think, is the answer. Shelley J saying, good evening, Robert. Good evening to you. I'm curious to know what you're getting from Helena's story right now. I noticed a couple of things in episode 5. To my eye, she looked maybe pregnant in her black morning dress. On the other hand, she was wearing a green dress, not a morning dress, when she confronted Aemond in the throne room. Her interactions with Alice, which made me wonder if the throne room conversation was all in Aemond's head. So, yeah, a couple of interesting points there. We already picked up on the might she be pregnant thing. I would have to go back and look at that again. Let me know in the chat. Is there anyone else who saw that? Because I didn't. When I watched it, I have to admit I didn't. I mean, I wasn't staring at her belly, but I didn't notice it. Now, in terms of that scene when you get Aemond staring at the Iron Throne and then her just sort of coming up and saying, "Was it worth it?" Yes, they were deliberately doing the echoes. They're doing this all the time, these echoes between Daemon and Aemond, and he's there talking about, I'll go and claim the Iron Throne. And then we get Aemond, who is there, who's basically claimed the Iron Throne because he thinks he's better at this, better suited to this than the other people, but he probably isn't. Ditto Daemon. So, but they're setting up the echoes, and part of that you get Alice Rivers, who's this kind of magical figure with Daemon, and you get Helena here as this kind of magical figure with Aemond. Is there more to it? Might that be a vision? I don't think that was a vision or dragon dream. I think that's a thing that actually happened. The bit that I would just say about Helena's story at the moment is that in the book, at this point, she's pretty much vanished from the story. After Blood and Cheese, she goes to her room, locks the door, barely eats, doesn't talk to anyone, doesn't want to come out. She's pretty much not there until tragedy strikes again later. They haven't gone down that route on the show, which seems to imply that they have got other purposes for her, but at the moment it's not 100% clear what those are. The implication has to be that she's going to be sort of coming out with a few more prophetic things, but what and when and how, I don't know. Just having a quick flick through. Weirwood Net saying, I don't think Alice is using a glamour. April May saying the Ghost of High Heart has red eyes. Yes, absolutely. Can't see anyone else who said that they thought that Helena looked pregnant, but that might just be that, like me, they didn't notice. I can be very unobservant sometimes. Dr. D. Bunk saying, I know I'm probably being too picky, but Jacaerys Velarion's trip to the Twins bothered me because the Winter Wolves and later Cregan Stark all came down the King's Road to Harrenhal and eventually King's Landing. They never needed to cross over the Green Fork of the Trident. Robb Stark needed to cross at the Twins to avoid the Lannister army at Harrenhal and get to Riverrun. Are the showrunners not looking at the map and inflating the importance of the Twins, or just giving Jace something to do as a filler or fan service? Because they cut most of Jace's earlier trip short. Well, yes-ish. I think there's a few different things going on here. In terms of are they giving him extra things? Then, yeah, I think they definitely are. Because they did cut out some of his journey, which should have happened in seasons 1 or 2. We didn't see him go to the Eyrie. He appears not in the show. He appears not to have gone to White Harbour at all. And we only got, what was it, 2 or 3 minutes of him in the north. So, yes, I think they're giving him a little bit extra. One thing they are playing up, which I'm intrigued to see where they go with this, but one thing they're playing up is him opposing his mother, which isn't really there in the book. we don't get huge amounts of personality from Jace in the book, it has to be said. We get some speculation about what he might have been up to in Winterfell, but in terms of sort of personality on Dragonstone, we don't get huge amounts. But here, remember when Rhaenyra came back from going to King's Landing, the person who basically was saying, "Where were you?" And when she says, and it like turns out that's a terrible idea. You could have been killed. He's the person leading on. And let's not forget, she's not only his queen, and so not only his mother, she's his queen, and he is to her face just saying that was a terrible idea. What on earth are you thinking? And that is the level at which Rhaenys used to like jump in for other people to be telling them off. She did that a couple of times, I think, quite amusingly. Um, but because it's Jace, nobody did. And now here he's like, "Oh, I'm just annoyed. I can't go flying anywhere. Hang on a minute. I think I'm going to go off and fly and see Damon. Oh no, maybe that's a bad idea. Where shall I fly? I'll go fly after the twins." This is open rebellion against orders from his queen. So that's that's quite a significant shift to have him so rebellious. It does make you wonder whether that's going to lead somewhere. But that's one thing, a deliberate showing of an element of Jace's character that we weren't previously aware of. And also, incidentally, going up to the twins, he was negotiating on his mother's behalf. He was giving away castles and things on her behalf without she didn't even know he was there. And here he was basically ruling in her stead. So yeah, that was quite a big thing. So that's the first thing. The second thing, in terms of troop movements, yeah, I think there was a little bit of fan service in terms of, hey, do you remember the phrase? They're a bit annoying. The phrase do end up in Harrenhal, or some of the phrase end up in Harrenhal in the book, so they're trying to give them a reason to be there. But there's, in terms of geography and troop movements, yes, I would agree with you, but they've made they've made a lot. Almost every episode they've said, "Oh, don't forget, there's a big Lannister army on its way soon." At some point, this Lannister army is going to be heading west out of the, oh, sorry, heading east out of the Westerlands, and the Winter Wolves presumably are going to be coming to try and cut it off. Now, they've shifted a few things. Pardon me, shifted a few things around. So Daemon hasn't got his army yet. Um, then, and as I say, I suspect the Battle of the Gullet's going to be pushed back. So elements of what's happened have shifted slightly. It would not surprise me if they say, okay, so the Lannisters are attacking from the west, therefore we're wanting the Winter Wolves to come in and they're going to have a battle between them. Maybe they will also um, have Kristen Cole come up with an army as well. So there's a few battles that happen around that time. I suspect they will squat in the Riverlands. They will squash them together into one big battle, which is just my guess. And they might as well have that on the side of the God's Eye Lake. So if you can come down in a way that gets you there quicker, which it would undeniably get you there quicker, then why not? Caius Ballerina, what do you think of Grey Area's idea that Alice is or is descended from the Green Witch from the Rainwood in the Stormlands, possibly House Mertens? Um, well, I mean, I don't know. I've not seen this video, so I don't know the logic behind that one. If it's from Grey Area, then she's very clever. So I've got no doubt that there's some good thought that's gone into it. I will have a look at it, and I will try and remember to pick up on this one and come back to it in my pre-show live stream in 2 or 3 days' time. And April May saying, I love how Alice walks like she is uncomfortable in her human body. She's been doing that since we very first met her. Yeah, absolutely. The whole I'm a barn owl thing works really well. Auntie Slayer. Hi, Robert. This is a bizarre question, but I keep thinking about it. Hearing the nicknames Jace and Luke is a little jarring for my immersion, even though it's canon. Off the top of my head, I can think of shortened names like Ned, Cat, Dunk, and Egg, but I don't feel you often get nicknames for nobles that they're known by. Don't think you often get nicknames for nobles that you know by. Many get an identifier, Littlefinger, Dragon Knight, etc. But Robert Baratheon is just Robert. Victarion is just Victarion. Jace and especially Luke seem to be changing the structure of the entire name. Can you share your thoughts on nicknames in A Song of Ice and Fire? Am I way off base thinking these specific nicknames don't follow the rules of other nicknames in the realm, and do different regions, cultures, castes have different nicknaming rules? I find this a fascinating question. So, um, I I think it is meant to be jarring because Targaryens tend not to do that. I mean, you've picked up on Egg, that's a child's nickname as much as anything else, and he was not King Egg; he was King Aegon. So that's just a friendly child's nickname for him. But other than that, when you think about most of the other Targaryens, um, you you have Rhaenyra, you don't have Ray or whatever. You don't have Day, you have Daemon. They're all done in full. Jaehaerys isn't Jay. So this seems not to be a Targaryen practice to have nicknames. Uh, Maybe just when you're children, as per Egg, but as a grown up, no, you don't seem to. So that's why it feels a little bit off, I think. Why, therefore, has George R. R. Martin done that? I I think that if you look at a lot of the more kind of northern or first many kind of houses, then they do seem more likely to have that. So Eddard is Ned. As an adult, everyone calls him Ned. That's just what it is. Brandon, all the Brandons, they're called Bran. You just shorten it to Bran. So um, that seems to be, and like Cat as Catelyn, it's Riverlands, which as we've been exploring a lot in House of the Dragon, they're very much playing up the Riverlands as being the old gods and the new, so they're closer to the kind of like the First Men kind of vibe. If they're going with this kind of idea that the First Men would do that, the First Men they might have a longer name, but they would cut it down to a one syllable, say, nickname, which was used all the way through your life, even when you're an adult, even if you're a lord. So that's the kind of feel we've got going on. This plays into Luke and Jace because, and Joff, for example, he's known as Joff, not Joffrey. You didn't get King Joffrey called Joff much. Um, this works because who is the real father of those children? Harwin Strong. And the Strongs are, as far as we can tell, First Men families, and so it's almost as if they had to be given names that were Targaryen-y, Jacaerys, but their real father just would naturally, with his kind of First Men instincts, he would shorten them. Luke, Jace. So and I don't know if this was what was in George R. R. Martin's mind, whether it was just instinctive, but that's how I've always felt about it, is that this is yet another clue that they are not really Valyrian. They are being treated, at least by their close family, as being sort of half First Men, really. Pious ballerina. Do you think, with the money the Freys make on travellers across the Twins, they could actually afford to upkeep or repair Harrenhal? Um, yeah, it's quite an interesting question. Um, they are one of the richest families, certainly in the Riverlands. The, I mean, there's two elements to that. The first is, could you restore it to its former glory? And I think the implication that the version we see of Harrenhal in the show is a hugely smaller than what we have in the books. It is supposed to be enormous. It's supposed to be massive. It's got I think, 70-acre godswood in there. Not just like, here's a weirwood tree, just in the backyard area. They've got this massive godswood going on there. They've got the towers are the shortest of them is 50% taller than the tallest tower in Winterfell. This is a huge castle. So the idea in the book of Daemon going, oh well, let's rebuild this. That's not that's not a thing. It took 40 years to build in the first place, and that's with slave labor, with them being worked to death. Quite literally, we're told. I think thousands of people died in the construction of it. So the idea that you could just like turn around and rebuild it in a matter of a few months or something, no. This is a massive undertaking. Could the Freys do that? Potentially. They do seem to get a lot of money from that, but it's the implication also seems to be with the phrase. We're not told it as much, but the implication is that they're not really spending it on huge amounts, so they're saving it and they're being um, uh, quite sensible. They've got the twins, which is like it's a good and interesting castle, but at no point in their history do they seem to have thought, well, we're going to just turn these into the greatest castle in the land or anything like that. That doesn't seem to be, or we're going to have the most beautifully decorated place. None of that seems to come into their minds. The second element with Harrenhal is the upkeep. They have kind of shown the Great Hall, particularly in the beginning of episode 1, season 1, where that was where people were voting for their great council. But even that isn't a patch on the size of the Great Hall that we have in the book. In the book, you could have an entire army in there. We're told it's got, I think it's 35 hearths. That's how massive it is. So the upkeep of this kind of just keeping that one place warm is ridiculous. And just having enough soldiers to stand around the outside of the miles of walls, it would cost huge amounts of money. So I suspect that they could probably bring it back up to a reasonable standard with the money that they've got. But I think you probably need Lannister level money to be able to actually turn that into something that you could run as a working castle. Which again, coming back to what we've been saying a few times, which again, it shows that Daemon perhaps his judgment is not the best on the show. If he's there genuinely thinking, can we repair this castle? No, you can't, Daemon. Maybe if you were there for a few decades, you could, but certainly not for this war. Question from Carolina Clay saying, how can Adam ride a dragon if he's Corlys's son? The last confirmed Targaryen in the Velaryon line is from the Conquest time. Well, yes, but we are told that they intermarried a lot. We don't know all of the detail here, but we're told that they intermarry a lot. And what we're also told is, or basically shown, is that it's not just about what level of Targaryen inheritance you have. That's a big part of it. But I, I said, I can't remember, one of my recent live streams that I said that if you look at Daenerys, who we think of as being like this definite Targaryen, she is at most, I said, at most 1/8 Targaryen if you just look at her immediate family tree. And then someone in the chat had actually gone through the whole thing and said actually she's like whatever it was, 1.5% Targaryen or something like that. Uh, it's not just about that. The Adam and Alyn, as far as we can tell, had the exact same genetic inheritance. One of them became a dragon rider, one of them didn't become a dragon rider. There's definitely more to it than just are you Targaryen enough? Martin S. I think Rhaenys was an experienced dragon rider beyond the abilities of Aegon II and Aemond. I suspect that if Aemond hadn't had a bigger dragon, he would lose. I'm not sure how accurate that is. Yeah, so definitely true, I think, is the answer. So they played up a lot on the TV show. Meleys was the quickest dragon. Vhagar on the show they've made even bigger than, as far as we can tell, Vhagar is in the book. Now, in the book, what it says in the Battle of Rook's Rest is, let's see if I can remember it exactly, against Vhagar, she might have had a chance. So that's what we're told, is that you put them up, Aemond on Vhagar against Rhaenys on Meleys, you would say probably you'd put your money on Aemond, but you wouldn't be 100% certain. And I quite liked the way that they did it on the TV show. They didn't. In the book, it was actually a really short battle. The dragons all sort of came together and then collapsed onto the ground. That was pretty much it. But here it showed that Rhaenys. I did a breakdown of the battle. If you're interested, I did a video breakdown of the battle. You saw her like doing up the clips on her saddle, and that's because she knew that she was going to be like flying basically almost upside down underneath Vhagar, and then sort of claw away at Vhagar's stomach. That was the plan, and then that if they sort of fall down in this kind of death spiral to the ground, she knew that Vhagar wouldn't be able to recover. Vhagar, very big and not particularly mobile, wouldn't be able to prevent itself from crashing into the ground, whereas Meleys probably could. So all that's doing is saying that in battle, Rhaenys, she knew what she was doing, and but for the terrain, probably she could have carried on doing that and possibly could have won. When I say but for the terrain, as I say, do look at the video if you want all of this. But what happens is she's flying after they bash to the ground. Vhagar's fallen to the ground, massive dust everywhere. Meleys flies up above it. Rhaenys is looking down. Where is it? That can't see? There's too much dust. Then what? And in her mind, she should be able to see when Vhagar takes off. You can see it because Vhagar very slowly has to do this big run up, boom, 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 just like that, and then sort of slowly takes to the air. So she's kind of expecting that, but seems to be what happens is that Aemond decided instead just to go off the cliff edge. And rather than taking a big long run up and be able to, so that everyone could see where she was going, go diving down, sticking close to the cliff edge so that Rhaenys couldn't see Vhagar and then came up as they came out over the cliff edge. That's what seemed to be the case. As I said, so I liked the way that they did. I thought that was a fantastic battle. But you're not wrong that Rhaenys seems to have been very good, and that if Aemond had had an equal dragon to her, then probably you put her as the favourite. Commander Ray in the chat saying John is short for Aegon. I see what you did there. Um, I think I've got a couple more questions. Ghost Streamer. Since Jace and Joff are likely Harwin of Harrenhal's sons, we don't see him much, but we know Laris. We don't see him much, but we know Laris. Is there a secret about them, Greensight and Alice, to be determined? So, is there a secret about Jason Joff, given that they are the sons of Harwin from Harrenhal? And therefore there's a connection across to Alice. I don't think the implication is that there's any kind of connection there. Harwin, yes, he will be from Harrenhal. He will have grown up there, but he moved out and is very much not connected with it. Certainly in the book, there's no kind of hint. He comes to King's Landing and he doesn't ever seem to want to go back. And when he does go back, he dies straight away. Laris similarly comes to King's Landing, but he is technically the Lord of Harrenhal. So I think Harwin probably, well, definitely will have known about a lot of Harrenhal's secrets, but I don't think that's played down to the next generation. Auntie Slayer saying that I always assumed Harrenhal will refuse to be restored, regardless of who took on the task. I think that's a very fair point. The Lady Eternal saying, good time zone, Robert and Dan, and to you. First men are tied closer to magic than Andals or Targs. In magic, knowing true names gives power, so nicknames are a defense. Ursula Gwyn springs to mind as a possible influence there. That's interesting. Yes, I mean, I wouldn't disagree. I think, though, that nicknames, the nicknames that the first men seem to have are quite common to what that name is. So to what somebody's true name is. So if you're Bran, everyone would know that you're actually Brandon. It's not a secret. That's what it's short for. And I think the same. I'm trying to think if we've got another Ned, not Ned Dane, but another Eddard Ned. But yeah, the shortenings of the names tend to be quite attached to the main name. So I like the idea. I'm not sure whether that quite works in this context. Whitney Davis, why does House Frey still exist? So many people ask this. I would have burned them. Did they just take, or I would have burned them. Did they just take lands and charge people a toll? Yeah, so then they're actually a relatively new house in Westerosi terms, and they got given tracts of land hundreds of years ago, and this was tracts of land either side of the river. Now, the river is the Green Fork is quite wide at this point. It's quite fast moving, and nobody had ever successfully built a bridge or something there. They did, but it took them 3 generations to build a bridge across the Green Fork there. Now, so for the first few generations, it's like, okay, this is nice. We've got this. We've now got an extra option. Basically, although we see them use this on these kind of big military maneuvers. There's, oh, the Starks needs to be heading down south. How do we get our army across there? Oh, it'll cost you. We see that element. Where the main use of this seems to be is if you kind of look at the map, it's between it, stuff going between, say, White Harbour and Seaguard, the Lannisters, that kind of cross Westeros route, because otherwise you have to go all the way down to basically the inn at the crossroads, the Ruby Ford, that kind of part of the river. There are ways across, and then all the way back up again on the other side. Now, if you do that, that's costing you time, is money. If you're a merchant, this is weeks of extra travel, and so the the phrase knew that for merchants would pay for the ease of getting across. So that's the bulk of their money. It's not these kind of big set piece, well, I'm going to charge this army a huge amount of money to get across here because there's a short-term strategic need for it. It's the drip, drip, drip of people who just don't want to spend all their time. They want to get from east to west across Westeros. They don't want to have to spend an extra few weeks going all the way down to a ford and then coming back up again. And although they're annoying, they are offering a service, and you do not have to use it. Basically, nobody's saying if you are a merchant, basically you're left with a choice. Do you want to pay the extra so that you get there on time, or are you happy not doing it? So it's not that they are annoying, but it's not that they're forcing anyone to cross the river. You can cross the river somewhere else. It's just that this is the best place to do it. I think I've got another couple of questions in the chat. Yeah, here we go. Carolina Clay, only children of at least one highborn parent get bastard surnames, so Alice has to be someone's child. Yes. And they do speculate about this in Fire and Blood. I think I'm actually on that. I can get to it nice and quickly. Here we go. So her name suggests bastard birth, it says in Fire and Blood, but we know little of her father and less of her mother. Muncan and Eustace tell us she was sired by Lord Lionel Strong in his callow youth, making her a natural half-sister to Harwin and Larys. But Mushroom insists that she was much older, perhaps even a generation older than that. So the answer is yes. That it definitely implies that she is a bastard-born member of House Strong, but we just don't know to who. And I'm reasonably happy they've not on the show. They've not really addressed that. Damon sort of started, by saying it means you're a bastard, and she just sort of says, "Yeah, but I'm all right when you get to know me." So yeah, they've kept it kind of vague, and I think that's the point. Chris, any take on the prophecy? Risky, has potential. Which prophecy is this you're talking about? I mean, Aegon's prophecy, do you mean? Um, yes, I mean it's. I'm not entirely sure what the question is. I do apologise. So, if you're asking whether or not it's the prophecy is going to come true, well, yes-ish, but only when we get up to A Song of Ice and Fire. And the point about George R. Martin's point about prophecies so often is that it's not just about the kind of the truth of the prophecy; it's about how much people believe it. Philip Plus saying, given Damon's experience with Harrenhal and Alice in the show, any guesses what Aemon's experience with both will be in season 3? Well, they will play. I don't know exactly, but I think we know some themes that are kind of come out. They will echo Damon with Aemond because they've done this all the way through the show, and that means that it's going to be him and Alice, and he's not quite sure what's going on, and there might be visions. I'm sure he's going to get visions and things as well. She is an older woman, particularly if she looks younger than she actually is, which is what the book suggests. And we've already had set up the fact that he does seem to like the older woman. So I think that's definitely another strand which is going to be coming in here. If they go with what happens in the book, which is that he basically kills all of House Strong except for her, that leaves her as the sole representative of Harrenhal. And that means that all of the things that we get, the Simon Strong and Damon kind of interactions, unless we get some other character introduced along the way, then she's going to be all of this. So it's going to be less like with Damon and her, it's almost as like he's sort of trying to go around his business, and then she just keeps on popping up and saying things, and he thinks he's finding her fascinating, but at the same time he's quite wary. With Aemond, I think it has the potential to be a lot closer. That she's there more of the, she's not just popping up; she's there around him a lot more of the time. Reflective Rambling, picking up a question for Callie Summers. Thank you very much. Saying, will Alicent recognise the parallel or sympathise with Rhaenyra now, having been passed over to rule just for being a woman? Yes, I guess. So what we definitely see here is Alicent, and I mean there was that great shot when Aemond takes over, and it's just very, very slowly kind of pans into her as she's sort of looking increasingly in shock and panicked at what's going on around her. And if you listen to what's going on in the back, this is when Aemond is sort of rattling off these different orders, and he's also picking on Larys a little bit, which is quite interesting. But will she now emote with Rhaenyra? A bit, maybe. We've not seen the last of this Alicent Rhaenyra interaction. It has to be said. In the book, when Rhaenyra arrives in King's Landing, Alicent comes out and basically has a peace plan and says, we've got to stop this now. How about we divide the nation this way? And she like literally draws lines on a map and sort of says, okay, so we'll have the bits in the kind of like the west and the south. You can have the sort of the east and the north. Let's just split the Seven Kingdoms and be done with it. Now, Rhaenyra clearly wouldn't go for that because the prophecy wants the Targaryens to be in charge of a united kingdom, so she's not going to be going for that. But the kind of where we're going to see the echo is that Rhaenyra came to Alicent basically saying, let's have some peace. And Alicent says, it's too late. Can't stop it now. Here and then we will get Alicent going to Rhaenyra and say, well, let's have some peace. And Rhaenyra basically saying, no, we can't do that now. It's we have to finish this thing. So yes, Alicent may empathize more, but we're going to get Rhaenyra in a position of saying, actually now I do need more war because we have to get rid of Aemond. Let's go to a question from Callie Summers, saying, hi, Robert. I hope you're well. Can you talk a bit about the relationship between Aemond and Helena? With the way the show is expanding on Helena's insight and prophecy, I've got a distinct impression that Aemond might be the one to give her the push to complete her character arc from the books. I loved seeing Baela step up this season. She was the character I secretly hoped to learn more about in the show from a very brief description near the end of Fire and Blood. And you also talk a little bit about Nettle. I've talked about Nettles already. But let's go to Aemond and Helena. So the relationship between Aemond and Helena is in the show, in the book, we don't see huge amounts about it. In the show, it's quite an interesting one. Aemond, we've already noted, Aemond said, I would marry her if I needed to. When Aegon was a bit grumpy about it, I think when we had that nice meal, when everyone was together and just before Viserys died, and he danced with Helena, I think, at one point. So there seems to be, I mean, their brother and sister, I think they seem to get on okay. And the fact that she can go to him and say, was it worth it, when he's staring there at the Iron Throne, it sounds quite innocent, but at the same time, it's her saying, "I know that you did stuff to make this happen. This wasn't just an accident. Aegon didn't just accidentally die. You caused this." Um, so he will be very aware of her. And there is a Ryan Condal, I think it was the interview that History of Westeros did with him. They asked him, has anyone spotted or noticed that Helena is coming out with these prophecies? Has anyone actually clocked this in world? And Ryan Condal says, yeah, someone has. And the more you think about it, the more it seems likely that that person was Aemond. So the question is, if Aemond now is acting king, basically, and we've got Helena there who knows that he was responsible for the near death of her husband, and can keep on coming out with little kind of truth bombs, then maybe that will set her up for being somebody that he wants to get out of the way. But personally, my working assumption, and I don't know whether they will do this on the show because this is kind of linked across to what happens in the Regency, which I don't think they're going to be covering on the show. But what happens, one of the things that happens at the beginning of the Regency is we get Jaehaera, her last child, her daughter, who basically, as far as we can tell, is murdered. She is pushed out of a window and of the Red Keep. Now, how does Helena die? Helena dies, as far as we can tell, from either jumping out of a window of the Red Keep or being pushed out of a window of the Red Keep. Given the fact that we know her as somebody who sees the future in various ways, what if she saw her daughter's future and that was the last thing, her last child gone, and then she has to see it and experience it, and then she just goes through with that same thing herself? It's tragedy and it's horrific, but maybe. Let's go to a question from Auntie Slayer saying the conversation between Baelor and Corlys was my favourite part of this episode, but I did have a question even after multiple replays. Was Corlys's offer to Baelor for the Driftwood throne a bribe, an honour, or both? It comes across as an honour, but it also feels like a last-ditch attempt to find an heir out of someone that needed something from him. My interpretation is that yes, he's not got an heir, and Rhaenys basically sort of suggested, well, you could go with one of your daughters as the heir. And so this is partly him going with what his beloved wife said, that pretty much almost the last thing she said to him. So there's that kind of element. I would just take a moment. I said this in my breakdown video, but if we just take a moment to think about Corlys here, he's lost a lot already. Yes, people are losing a lot in the Dance of the Dragons, but already to Team Black, he has lost a lot. His wife has just been killed doing a thing that's in the books, at least. He thought that Rhaenyra could have gone and done this. Why on earth did Rhaenys have to go and do it? His son on the show, he probably still thinks that Laenor was killed by Daemon and Rhaenyra. His daughter was married to Daemon and then died, giving birth to his son. He's lost a grandson who was supposed to be the heir to his throne. He's lost his brother, who got his head cut in half by Daemon, if you remember back in season 1. He's lost a lot already to Team Black. And what has he got left? He's now an old man. He doesn't. He's older in the books than he comes across on the TV show, and he's looking for an heir. And the heir that he thought he had died. Who's he going to give it to now? Well, he's got other grandchildren. Try them, and they say no. This is leading up, obviously, to the Alan and Alice. Alan and Adam situation, but I think it was just him trying to find somebody in his family to take on. Tradition means a lot to him, but to take on the Driftwood throne after him and trying to honor the wishes of his now dead wife. So, friend, hi Robert. You've frequently covered how House of the Dragon has had to do things a bit differently than the book, and generally, I think we can say that they've been for sensible tweaks that have worked out well on screen. First question: are there any such tweaks that stood out for you that worked really well translating A Song of Ice and Fire into the TV show? The season 2 Arya Tywin scenes went down very well, and. So you've then got more speculative for question 2. What tweak from the first half of the show do you think will prove to have led of the House of the Dragon? I think you mean, or no, you were talking about Song of Ice and Fire. Do you think will prove to have the biggest deviation later in the game between the show and the books? You aren't allowed to pick Killing Officer Barristan. Okay, so what worked well? We're talking about Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire, so we're kind of slowly switching out from House of the Dragon to more broader Song of Ice and Fire questions. Now, keep on dropping House of the Dragon questions into the chat if you want. I will pick them up. What worked well? I mean, there were a lot of tweaked scenes, particularly in the first couple of seasons, that I think worked really well. There was a scene they added in between Robert Baratheon and Cersei, where they talk about their marriage that wasn't in the books, that I thought worked really well. I agree the Arya Tywin scenes worked well. I mean, not in terms of like the fact that you just kind of think, surely Tywin would have realised, but the dynamic between the characters worked really well. But in terms of tweaks, I think there's Shay. I think the way the character changes they made to Shay, George R. Martin has picked that up as a thing which he thought was really good and added layers to the story. I'd also and I think we're far enough out from it that I hope it doesn't get misinterpreted, but I think there are some things they took out that I can understand from a kind of a page to screen perspective, like Jane Westerling. Now, I love Jane Westerling. The Jane Westerling storyline in the books, I think, is absolutely fascinating. What's going on with her mother? Where are the lines of loyalty going on there? Does this add in extra potential for heirs and things? There's so much going on there. But I understand that on a TV show, you've got limits. You can't do every plot line. So that's the kind of thing that I think they did all right on, actually. And they didn't make it better, but they made the removal of a plot line not detract from the show as a whole. So that's the kind of thing I would want to sort of tip my hat to there. And also another one like that, I would say, combining Gendry and Edric Storm. We missed out a lot. Don't get me wrong. In an ideal world, the TV show would have covered every single thing that is in the books. But if you had to trim that down, merging those two characters, I think they did a reasonable job of that. So yeah, don't get me wrong. I would have loved to have everything there, but I think one thing they did in some of the early seasons of Game of Thrones, which they did quite well, was to trim out um, almost kind of standalone small bits of the plot quite well. Um, in terms of speculation of what tweaks from the first few seasons of the show will have the biggest deviation uh, later in the game between the show and the books, well, uh, I mean, there's a lot. Um, the one which is probably going to be it's going to be one of the biggest ones is the decision to take out Fagon, young Griff, because whereas at the moment that just all that's all we saw on the show was that we don't get that nice voyage that Tyrion had and all of the trying to figure out what's going on. But when you move forward in the books, well, what does this mean? Well, so he's actually launched an invasion. He's very probably going to take King's Landing, uh, and be fated as a Targaryen king. When Daenerys arrives, that completely shifts the dynamic. She's no longer just facing Cersei, a clear enemy. She's now facing somebody who's claiming to be family and claiming to be ahead of her in the line of succession. So that adds a completely different dynamic to what's going on, and it pushes Cersei out, probably off to somewhere like Casterly Rock, which completely changes her story arc. So, yeah, just the decision to take him out probably has got some massive implications. Um, DickCrabb'sSquire. When are you going to do a segment on Jalabhar Xho? He's been involved in every major happening in the royal court. The Hans tourney, Jeff Joffrey's first court, the bread riot, the royal wedding, etc. Aside from mail and boiled leather and in a fortnight, the most often uttered phrase in the books is, and Jalabhar Xho was also in attendance. So, for those who don't know this character, he's a summer islander in the court in King's Landing. He is extravagantly dressed compared to the people in King's Landing. He's got all of these kind of like big, brightly coloured feather cloaks and things like that. He's an exile from the Summer Islands, and every now and then he uh, petitions the king to help him retake his part of the Summer Islands. Give me an army, some money, help me out, and I'll go back and retake this part of the Summer Islands that he wants, he claims. And so he is there. He's around the court. We keep on seeing him sort of just mentioned. He Where we leave him in the story is that he spends quite a bit of time with Marjorie, and Marjorie's sort of caught within a court. He is accused of being one of the people that Marjorie sleeps with, and is therefore put into the cells in the Red Keep. So, what his kind of future is, we don't know. Some people have gone on wondering whether or not this might be like a spy for somewhere, whether there's some kind of great plot going on. My take is that we're supposed to see this as a kind of parallel to Viserys and Dany. And particularly what happens with Dany later on is that we have this character who he keeps on asking for help, and Robert Baratheon, he never says no, but he's always like, next year, try me next year. And Cersei thinks of him as a beggar prince. Quentin Martell thinks of him as an amusing curiosity, and he's basically just this character who he comes from a different land and is now in the court, stands out a mile. Everybody just thinks, oh, what an amusing person we've got here, what an interesting character, let's learn about you and your culture. And we're supposed to see that as an echo or mirror for what happens with Viserys and Dany, particularly the beggar prince idea was very much like Viserys. People would entertain them in the free cities. And Viserys would say, I just need an army to retake my land. And they would just treat them as an amusement. Here's these Targaryens. This family used to have dragons, you know. That's the kind of feel. Similarly, Dany, when she gets over to places like Karth, she's the person everybody wants to see and look at. And oh, you got some dragons. That's fascinating. So that's the kind of feel we've got. And I think what George R. Martin there is doing is he's just creating this echo in a way that we should find accessible. We should understand. Okay, instinctively we're Westerosi, as readers, we're being invited to sympathize with Westerosi culture, but he's trying to show us this works both ways. This character here seems exotic and fun and interesting, so let's all just let him keep hanging around and just not quite give him what he wants with whatever strange foreign land he's trying to get back to. That's exactly how it should be feeling for Dany and Viserys. Carolina Clay. The Long Night seems to have been a worldwide event, but I don't remember there being any evidence of the others anywhere but in Westeros. Have I missed any references? Um, uh, if so, would they eventually plan to expand the Dominion all over? If Essos and Westeros are actually connected up north, where the maps don't show, maybe they come down there as well. Yes, so we don't have all of the. Our story is Westeros based, so we only find out about the Westeros thing. But when you get to the world of Ice and Fire, you get legends. In particular, you get legends from Yi Ti and the Far East. We know that Essos, it's not sort of joined to the North Pole for most of the bits that we know, but when you get off to the Far East, perhaps it does sort of head off up that way, and you get legends. First of all, the Long Night did hit Essos. The the Rhoyne froze. The Rhoyne is a massive river. The Rhoyne froze, and the Long Night happened. And when you get all the way over to Yi Ti, you get these legends of demons coming. So it was there, and the implication is that yes, it's all joined up at the top, and they did sort of come down in two different places. But we're not going to see that plot in this story. This is a story about Westeros. So when we get to the Long Night Part 2, maybe we'll get some rumours about something happening over in Essos, but we're not going to be shown it because that's not the story that we're being told. Catherine Furseth and saying, oh, actually, Andrew Cage is saying, yeah, Essos has its own analogous long night ingredients: five forts, grey waste, shrikes, and bloodless men. So the five forts, yes, is an equivalent to they're sort of guarding the way off to the northeast. They're the equivalent to the wall. Catherine Furseth saying, Hot D, House of the Dragon, has definitely expanded our knowledge of dragon lore when it comes to bonding, etc. It seems clear that one person can only be bonded with one dragon. If that dragon dies, do you think it's possible for them to bond with another? Pardon me. I can't think of a single example of this, but maybe you can. Coming to the current story, this explicitly means that Dany will only truly bond with one dragon, and that the other two are more up for grabs when it comes to who will bond with them. It's never discussed in the Song of Ice and Fire, but House of the Dragon has shown us that dragons don't feel family bonds to each other, nor to humans, and that they will willingly fight both dragons and riders with whom they have been close for many years. Do you think this fact is setting up a major twist in the Song of Ice and Fire with Dany's two leftover dragons? Well, yes, so we don't have anywhere so far dragons, somebody who is bonded to more than one dragon at the same time. And similarly, we don't even have, if a dragon dies, does their person go off and can their person go off and bond with another dragon? Now, the best example we have there of a possibility is Viserys, but we're told that he never even tried. So he was the last rider of Balerion Black Dread. When Balerion died, then he didn't try and bond with another dragon after that. So, but we're left to wonder whether that's because he couldn't or simply didn't want to. He didn't like flying. In the show, we do get this kind of throwaway line that, um, they're not. I can't remember exactly what it was, but he basically said they're not tamed. The idea that we're in control of them is completely wrong. And so, uh, what does this mean for Dany's dragons? Well, I think yes, she's only going to bond with Drogon. The other two, she may well be their mother, so to speak, but they could potentially be bonded to somebody else. Now, I think the working assumption most of us are going under is that Jon will bond with a dragon, probably Rhaegal, named after his father. And the other one, well, it's possible that she might, or that we might get someone like um, Fagon, young Griff, trying to claim the dragon. But it's also possible we've got somebody who's trying to claim a dragon by force at the moment, which is Euron. In the show, the third dragon got claimed by the Night King. That's not going to happen because the Night King does not exist in the books so far. Um, Now, I do wonder whether they went with that having been told that Euron was going to get a dragon, and they didn't want to make Euron a massive character because they were trying to constrain the story rather than build it up. So they just said, okay, well, the Night King can be the baddie who's got the dragon. But Euron has sent Victarion over with a Valyrian horn, which allegedly allows you to control dragons. So perhaps he will get a dragon, and then Dany just has her own dragon and one more, and then Jon will bond with that. All of which would lead to the possibility of what you're, I guess, asking. Yes, we could have a battle between two of Dany's dragons. I do wonder whether we're going to be set up with um, a battle above the God's Eye with Euron One Eye and Jon Snow, which is echoed perhaps in the fact that we've got Aemond One Eye, who was in the battle above the God's Eye. So is this where they're going to go with this? That we get another kind of battle, and that's George R. R. Martin loves this kind of history echoing through the ages. So it's not certain, but it makes sense to me. Stringer Studios, what's your take on the Hooded Man, the murders in Winterfell, Mance, Ghosts, and Theon? Oh, well, I'll do a whole video on this one at some point. So I'll just sort of do an overview here. This is the last penultimate chapter that Theon's got up in Winterfell, that we've got a ghost in Winterfell, and basically at this point we've got Mance Rayder, who is there in Winterfell with his spear wives, 6 spear wives. They've been sent there on a mission by Melisandre. We've got the House Bolton, who are technically the Lords Paramount of the North by this point. A few allies, the Freys are there for them, but also a few people in there like the Manderleys who are pretending to be falling into line, but really they're not. Winter has truly descended. It's snow drifts tens of feet high, meters and meters high. It's a really odd situation of what is going on. There's a whole series of murders, and then Theon runs or passes by. He's going through this snowstorm. A hooded man stops and says, "Theon Turncloak," at him, and uh, they have a very short exchange. It's less than half a page, and then basically the hooded man, having recognized Theon, just sort of says, "I'll leave you to Ramsay then." So the implication was that he wanted to kill him, but then he realized that he was with Ramsay and thought, well, Ramsay's going to do more damage than me. So what's going on? Well, the murders, I think there's a lot of different people doing these murders. To be honest, it's not like a person doing it, but they are creating tension within Winterfell. The hooded man, um, uh, we get a lot of different clues, but this is someone who knows Theon, who considers him to be a turncloak, so somebody from Winterfell, so kind of like a Stark loyalist, somebody who didn't know that he was there, so somebody relatively newly arrived, someone who states the obvious by like saying a name. I think this is Hallis Molin myself, but I will do a whole video on this. Maybe I'll change my mind when I'm writing the video. That sometimes happens when I go through all of the evidence. Um, Uh, Blitzen, thank you very much for the super chat. Your first super chat, thank you very much. Saying, I was just wondering what your thoughts are on Sunfire in House of the Dragon. Do you think he's actually dead? The wording of Kristen seems rather vague. Thanks for all the amazing content. Reminder of the spoiler policy here. The book spoilers are fine. The books have been out for a while. I will happily tell you what happens in the books. Show spoilers are not okay. I don't know what happens in the show. I have no reason to doubt that what happens in the book will happen on the show. That said, they've changed a few things. So what happens in the book is that Sunfire survives. I agree on the show, then Kristen Cole's words were a bit vague, but the fact that he left somebody guarding the dragon seems to imply that the dragon is still alive. And he said something like he's long in the dying or something like that, but it wasn't quite clear whether that meant it took a long time for him to die or he hasn't died yet. I think it's the latter. So in the book, then he does sort of eventually recover-ish, still hugely damaged, and managed to fly off. So I think that's and then has a big role to play later on in the story. But I think that's basically what will happen here. They mentioned Sunfire, so we know that Sunfire is not just dead, and there is a kind of a throwaway, rather fun Sir Serwyn of the Mirror Shield moment when a knight tries to kill the dragon and dies. I do wonder whether that might be quite a fun sort of cold open to an episode at some point, where you have a knight trying to be kind of like St. George and slaying a dragon that's just lying down and can't really move, but still gets blasted by dragonfire. And I think that's me caught up in the chat. Commander Ray, I wanted to ask how you see Euron's plan going forward and how he'll clash or deal with the other players of the game. And I wanted your opinion on quite how weird or Lovecraftian George will go with Euron and all that. Right. So Euron in the book is several notches up from Euron on the TV show. He sets out his plan. Basically, we get this in the pre-released chapter, the Forsaken pre-released chapter of The Winds of Winter, which we're assuming is going to stay the same. And in that, he basically says to Aaron that what his plan is to destroy all the gods, become a god, and rule like a god, which just sounds crazy. Um, but what he seems to be doing in order to do this is just create destruction and chaos. He's an agent of destruction and chaos, and he thinks that he can survive through this, and all he can basically destroy the gods. And the first step in doing this is setting up a massive sea battle, strapping um, various priests to the front of ships, plus also his lover who and his unborn child. And as he is a king, that's king's blood going on there. So all of the magical sacrifices going on, and there's going to be blood in the water. I think that we're going to get krakens arriving. The amount of times we've been told this, that blood in the water will draw them, we haven't yet seen them. I think they will arrive. Um, I think that there's at least a 50% chance that a dragon may come flying over, and he bonds with the dragon, not in a kind of like a dragon bond, but a forced bond, a control of the dragon in some way. And then I think he's just going to try and roll across Westeros and destroy it. His plan to uh, basically marry Daenerys is not going to happen, but I think that he may well find himself teaming up with Cersei if she heads back home. If she has to leave King's Landing, as she almost certainly will, if she heads back home to Casterly Rock, she will be looking for allies. He will be looking for allies, and she's going to be there with Qyburn, who is creating undead monsters. If we think of Robert Strong, Zombie Mountain, as just a prototype, then we have to say he can produce more. And so we get some sort of undead imagery associated with Cersei sometimes, and then we get a Euron being this complete agent of chaos. In the longer run, I see him as being the equivalent of Saruman. What I mean by that is he's like the secondary villain. So we're going to get the others, also the dragons as well. Let's not forget the dragons can cause huge amounts of death and destruction. But once they've been dealt with, and George R. Martin has hinted at this in his comments on how he wants to end it all. But once that's all been dealt with, then our heroes just take this big sigh and look around and go, "Oh, and we've also got to deal with this guy." So that's the kind of the role, and he's the kind of the equivalent of the Scouring of the Shire, I think. But we'll have to wait and see. He's one of the least predictable characters out of everybody because he's just about destruction. If he finds a new thing that he can do, some new magic, then I think he will use it. Lady Pushkin's another thing I've been thinking about is how visions or dreams the Targaryens have don't specify a time necessarily. For example, Daenerys' dream about the Doom happened 12 years later. This could have consequences and make sense for the Ice and Fire prophecy. We don't know a timescale, and therefore shows how prophecies can be misinterpreted, e.g., Rhaegar and the three heads and who he thought this was referring to. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. There is one other thing which is worth, I think, noting when it comes to Rhaegar and prophecy. Rhaegar was obsessed with prophecy. He knew about the prince that was promised prophecy. And one thing which is, I think, often overlooked about what happened immediately before he got together with Lyanna. We had the year of the full spring with the tourney at Harrenhal. Everything was quite nice, mild weather. Had a tourney, and then everybody went home. And then winter came back. Winter came back with a vengeance. We're told that the river, the Blackwater Rush was frozen over. The icicles were hanging down long from the Red Keep. This was a hugely hard winter. When everybody had thought that winter had long gone past, winter comes back. when you start thinking about what was Aegon's dream about, what was this Song of Ice and Fire, a, a, a wintertime, cold air. This, I think, is the kind of thing which could have tipped Rhaegar over the edge from I need to make sure that the prince that was promised is ready to. This is happening now. I need to do this now. We need to go get. I need to have another child. You can't have a child with me, Elia. Let's go get Lyanna. We'll do. So that's where his mind is probably going, pushed on by the fact that suddenly there's this massive winter's arrived, and he's convinced that that is the kind of the starting point for the need for the prince that was promised. Let's go to a question from a Son of Ice and Fire. There seems to be two main ways to bond with a dragon. Bonding with a dragon that is older and may or may not have had previous riders, like Aemond and Vhagar, or by bonding with an egg or newly hatched dragon, like Aegon II and Sunfire. Bonding with older dragons gets you a more powerful or experienced dragon, but they can be more dangerous and less likely to obey, while bonding with younger dragons results in a smaller dragon, but the bonds seem to be more successful compared to the alternative. Both methods seem to have pros and cons. Which do you think is better? Well, I think that both have pros and cons. So it really depends on what you're wanting. If you're Aemond and you want the biggest, baddest, most impressive dragon out there, if you're just wanting a dragon to fly because you just enjoy flying and you're not expecting to be going to war when you're still a small child, then probably you get with your own little hatchling from your own little egg. So it does depend entirely on context on that. For me, I want the one that I've got the strongest bond with because they're dangerous. Martin Malachek saying, "Hi, Robert. I bought the audiobook of Fire and Blood 3 days ago and already made it to the Regency. It's fantastic. It is. It is really fantastic. I have to admit, after listening to it, the show feels a little disappointing, and I'm not looking forward to future episodes as much as I used to. What are your thoughts on show changes to characters and their arcs? Keep going. Keep doing what you're doing. Your content is wonderful. Well, thank you very much." So they've made a lot of changes to characters. This doesn't get talked about huge amounts because it's easy to sort of spot that happened different in the books to the show. But in terms of characters, a lot of characters have been changed a lot. Now, in world, you can easily say it's because the Maesters they weren't sort of telling us about people's characters, and they had their own agendas. Maybe they didn't want this character to come across well, etc. But it is undeniable that there are some characters who are very different. Rhaenys is on the top of my mind because I did a couple of videos about her and Rook's Rest. On the show, Rhaenys comes across really well as somebody who is very clear. She doesn't want to start the war. She's always encouraging Rhaenyra to go off and try and find peace. She's ready with a wise word. So she seems quite this mature, peace-loving person. In the book, when the Black Council happens, when they hear what happened with Aegon, she is there just full of fire and fury. She's the first person to say this is war. The next thing she says is, right, we need to send all our dragons over to King's Landing now and take them on. And everything she says in this period is combative. She's wanting war. And when we get to the Battle of Rook's Rest, and I think Eve Best did fantastically, her facial expressions when she turns around and goes back into combat, it's just like this world weariness. I have to do this. She doesn't want to do this, but she has to. In the book, Rhaenys charges into battle with a glad cry, we're told, that she wants that. She's desperate for it. So the character changes are different. Now, I love the character of Rhaenys on the show. I thought they did really well with it. Eve Best, I thought, did brilliantly well with it. But this is a shift to what we got in the book. So I think it varies from character to character. Some of them, overall, they've tried to make the characters a lot more relatable, which you can understand. And I think that has, in the most part, allowed them to have extra layers to the character. So it's only the changes that haven't really added any subtlety to the character. That's the kind of stuff, like with Laris. I love Laris in the books because we don't really know where he's coming from. On the show, he's still a fascinating character, but he seems a little bit more obvious and a little bit more obviously bad guy evil. So yeah, a mixed bag in terms of what I think there. For my people, saying, I'd venture to put Rhaenys in the same boat as Alicent and Rhaenyra, as all the female characters come off as bloodthirsty and warlike in the book. They definitely do in the book. Rhaenyra doesn't come across very well at all in the book, and if not kind of bloodthirsty. So a lot of the time, particularly in the equivalent of the season 2, she's described in the book as being pretty absent. Mourning the death of her children, not capable of engaging with the war effort, things like that, which is very different to what we've got on the TV show. So yeah, this is a constant Maester a bias against women in positions of authority. Andrew, I've only got 2 or 3 more questions here. So please drop a few more questions into the chat. I'll try and pick up as many as I can. Madeline Tyrell-Dayne saying, hi Robert, hope you're well. I am, thank you. What new information or lore do you hope to see revealed in the Tourney at Harrenhal play? Are there any particular characters or events you're excited to see and brought to life on stage? So the Tourney at Harrenhal play is what it sounds like. There's a stage play being produced at the moment, about the Tourney at Harrenhal. We don't know huge amounts about that, although George R. R. Martin he teased jousting. Jousting on the stage sounds fantastic. Now, the latest update in terms of timing is sometime in 2025, so that seems to have been pushed back a little bit. He'd previously hoped for by the end of this year. He's not writing it, but I think it's probably fair to say that he will have more creative control over this than he does over, say, an HBO TV series, because HBO will have bought the rights and the final say over everything that appears, whereas a stage play, it's not like a whole season, it's just like one play. I don't know how long, 2-3 hours maybe, and he will be able to provide comments on every single thing if he wants to. And he has met up with the people several times. He's met up with the production team there. So I'm hoping that we get. I mean, I think they'll still be kind of semi-canon, but I'm hoping we get some big reveals from this. What in particular? Well, I'd love to see Howland Reed and what he's really up to, because he's coming from the Isle of Faces. He's there on a mission, and I'd love to see what's going on there. But I suspect, given the fact that they've changed the name from the Tourney at Harrenhal to the Iron Throne, it seems to imply that the focus is not going to be on characters like Howland Reed. The focus is going to be on characters like Aerys and Rhaegar, which means that I'm fascinated to know, with Rhaegar, first of all, what's the prophetic kind of push that we've got going on here, and secondly, the clear implication in the books is that this was all a big setup, so that he had this big plan that he was going to call an effective great council there and get everybody discussing whether he should take over from his father now. So that's stuff that I think we will learn from it. The stuff I fear we won't learn about, and also the Night of the Laughing Tree. Surely we're going to see who the Knight of the Laughing Tree is, and why it's Lyanna. But confirmation of those kinds of things would be amazing. What I suspect we won't see is the kinds of things that I would love to, which is what's the Dayne situation. What's going on there? She was there, but yeah, it might be one of those things where you just have to kind of look in the background of the stage play rather than just what people are saying. If they've got some kind of stage direction as to who she's cozying up to at different points in time, that will be absolutely fascinating. Incidentally, what I'd love is that what they sometimes do for big plays like this is that they publish the script as a book. So we will actually have that. It's not just going to be a matter of you only know what this is if you've been to see the play, which will be, to start with, probably quite limited. It sounds like they're aiming for it to start in London, which is great for me, but I know it's not necessarily good for everyone else. But if it start in London, then move over to various other places and go on tour and things like that. But still, only a limited number of people be able to see it at any given one time. But hopefully, they will publish the script. Chris saying, yes, I did mean the Ice and Fire prophecy. Do you think they could take the theme from A Feast for Crows and have the prophecy be Rhaenyra's own undoing? So is the prophecy going to be Rhaenyra's own undoing? I mean, I don't know whether it's going to be the most intriguing line. Sorry, I'm slightly backtracking here. The most intriguing line I had from her regarding this was not her presenting it to Jace, although it was fascinating that she emphasized different things than when she was told it. But the fact that she said that she didn't really believe it to start with, and now she does kind of believe it, but only because she has to believe that it's right in order for this to justify what was just about to happen. So um, she will be faced with a big issue about who does she tell after her, because her heirs die, and then she will die, and will she try and pass this on to somebody? Might she even try and pass it on to Aegon? That would be fascinating. I don't think it will be the cause of her death, but it will be a running theme through the seasons of the show. Ghost Dreamer, Isle of Faces. Could Daemon be its Bloodraven? I mean, I love this idea. Lots of people have wondered this. If Daemon in the books, he falls from a great height and dies. Presumably, we never actually see his body in the God's Eye Lake. Might he then get dragged to the surface, saved from death, hooked up to the Weirwood network, and then become Bloodraven effectively in the Isle of Faces? He's not shown much by way of Greenseer stuff, is I think the answer. What I think there is that maybe his death will allow the Weirwood network to understand Targaryens a bit more and say, okay, what we're really after is the Targaryen and old sort of first men blood together, which leads them onto Bloodraven. A couple of Lord of the Rings questions. Andrew Biederman saying, hello, Robert. By what means do you suppose Elrond does his healing? As in, did he physically cut open or go digging with medical instruments to get the Morgul blade shard out of Frodo? Or did he perhaps use magic or words of power? Some combination? I'm interested in your thoughts generally, as his healing is said to be unmatched. Yeah, so, well, we don't know because we're not shown it. But I think the answer is a bit of both. So Aragorn seems to have learned a lot of healing things from him, and when we see him do the healing, then he is basically saying, okay, we need this particular type of herb here. We're going to rub it here. This is ancient knowledge that we've been keeping, and we can treat things with the right ingredients, basically. So that certainly seems to that kind of very natural approach, and that feels kind of elvish. So it does kind of fit in with Elrond. Um, there was a physical bit of a dagger in Frodo, so I suspect that had to be physically taken out in some way. But yeah, we're not really talking. Words of command is a really bizarre. I mean, Gandalf mentions words of command once, but we're not ever really given a full um, description of what they are. So basically, he puts this kind of shield or lock spell on a door, and then the Balrog kind of like blasts it off, and then he's there going, "Yeah, I should have done a word of command on that." So that seems like an extra powerful layer of magic. So, but perhaps limited to Maiar and people like that. Elrond, he has got a little bit of Maya ancestry as well as the elf and human ancestry. So all of this, I think, comes down to the fact that Tolkien deliberately doesn't want people to understand his magic system. He doesn't want there to even be a system. He wants there to be such a vague line between magic and not magic that you don't know exactly where that line is. When Sam is in Lothlorien and he's sort of like saying, have you got magic here? And then Galadriel says, I mean, what you might call magic, but we don't. It's just part and parcel of nature that we're in tune with it. So that I think is the kind of feel that we've got for Elrond as well. And then Callie Summers asking whether there's a good explanation for why the Gondorians never pulled the Osgiliath Palantir out of the river. Something besides it's too big and heavy, but also hard to find for 700 years. It seems like they could have at least looked for it. Yes, so for those who don't know, so the Palantiri, those kind of like seeing stones, there was a massive one in Osgiliath, which is that ruined city just east of Minas Tirith, and the city was over the river Anduin. Some of it on one side, some of it on the other, big bridge going across. It was in this room in the middle of this building, in the middle of the bridge, and there was a war, and basically it got lost, and it went plop down into the river and got lost. So, why is there a better answer than it's too big and heavy and hard to find? Well, I think sadly that is the right answer. It's quite hard to gauge exactly how wide the River Anduin is at that point, but various estimates could be anywhere between half a mile and 3 miles wide. This is massive. And so dredging it, they don't have any kind of dredging technology. And the Gondorians at this point, they're much diminished from what they were before. And the current is massive. It will be incredibly deep. Um, Basically, it's lost. Is the short answer. It's almost certainly gone down to the bottom. If it didn't go down to the bottom, if it was being pushed along by the tide, then it's been washed out to sea somewhere. So they don't even know exactly where it is. And they weren't in a position to go hunting for it straight away. And if you imagine the biggest, widest river that it's probably a bit bigger and wider than that. And if you were just living in medieval times, could you get something from the middle bottom of that river? Probably no. So it might not be the answer we want, but it is the answer. Okay, let's go have a quick flick through the chat. Jamie Bone saying, I just wanted to say I love your channels and your videos, engrossed in the well-told tale. Well, thank you. I mean, if you don't know the well-told tale, that's my other channel. It's also a podcast, if you prefer listening to things as a podcast, where I audio narrate books. My favorite and the best fantasy and science fiction books ever written. So if that appeals to you, you just want me reading books, and check out The Well-Told Tale. April May saying, when we see Sunfire on the ground, he is melting. Yeah, all the fire. He's going to be really. So basically, his wounds kind of mirror Aegon's, and the two of them are really closely linked. We don't think about it huge amounts, but they are. When you look at Aegon's sigil, you'll see that it's a golden dragon. That's how closely he is associated with Sunfire, and so their injuries are supposed to be matching each other. Is that they're close to death, but just gonna pull through, maybe never the same again though. Having a quick flick through. Kelly Summer saying, you would think House Tyrell would support Rhaenyra and her sons. They are all about growing strong, after all. Thank you for that. Um, and yeah, I think that's probably it. So with that, what I will do is just say, if you well, I will be back. Well, I'll be on now on Thursday, so I'll be back on this channel with live stream, pre-show live stream on Sunday, and then we'll be back. I've got a Tolkien video coming out on the main channel on Friday, and then we'll have the breakdown video and video, I think, also coming out on the Monday, about kind of a lore video coming out as well. But if you are watching this back a little bit later on YouTube, there's a link appearing somewhere around here to more of these live streams. If you'd like to watch them, there's a link appearing somewhere around here to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel if you would like to do so, in which case, thank you. Patrons, thank you. Moderators, thank you. You are amazing. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again next time.